sequence start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is Out of Bounds, two guys talking sports and astrology. You're listening to Wayne Moody and Mark Lerner.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is podcast 105, and it's Sunday, November 20th, 2022. And after offering podcast 104 on the astropsychology of life and the great beyond, part 1, we now present Out of Bounds, two guys talking sports and astrology with Wayne Moody and myself, Mark Lerner. And this episode is entitled The Astrology of the USA and the World, November 20, 2022 to January 2023. So this new podcast, including numerous key stories with astrological significance in this fourth episode of Out of Bounds, is focused on the big picture of the first ever Pluto return in Capricorn for the USA, using our national birth chart from the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. And this Pluto return is happening 3 times this year. Plus the transit of Neptune in Pisces making its first opposition in 164 years to the USA Neptune in Virgo during 2021 and 2022. Plus Mars now retrograde in Gemini from October 30th of this year to January the 12th of 2023. And with the red planet especially making a several-week transit over the always profound and often surprise-bringing radical change agent, the USA Uranus placement during most of January 2023. Charts this time include the USA horoscope and an astrolocality world map based on the USA horoscope. And overall, this is podcast number 105, offered to the public since May of 2019. Wayne, how you doing?
I'm fine, Mark.
Great. Okay, Brother Wayne is here, and what I'm going to do is just simply list the topics in this particular episode and in our preparation. As many of you know, I've shared before, we had been doing this many, many times before we started the first one, and that was also in GPS Astrology, the new online magazine that came out August 11th of this year at the full moon. Then we had another of our Out of Bounds, and Brother Wayne has articles in both of those, so do I. The GPS Astrology from October 9th, that was our last issue at the full moon there of Libra and Aries. And the next GPS Astrology will be January 6th. And if you go to Great Bear Enterprises, that's www.greatbearenterprises.com, you can read both of these issues. There's a tab, GPS Astrology, and you can read both the issues. You can see Wayne's articles, particularly on astrocartography, Harans, different relocation techniques, and so on, which is all fascinating. And I'll also be, I think I'll do it right now. Let me just put Wayne's book out there, War Impulse Pattern, Primer to Not on the Map. Let me read my words here. How to See America's War Impulse Pattern, Wayne A. Moody, and you can get his book on Amazon. And otherwise, GPS Astrology, August issue, October issue at greatbearenterprise.com. And you'll also see my stuff in there, and you can always correspond with me at the email address I provide. Okay, so I'm going to just mention the points that Wayne is going to bring up in a moment. We've got issues, and you can spend however minutes you want, Brother Wayne. There's been a massive snowfall in the Buffalo Orchard area from the lakes, pouring in so many feet of snow that they even had to transfer the game that was supposed to be in Buffalo over to Cleveland. And then we know that the celebrity Jay Leno, on the last 48 hours or so, who hosted The Tonight Show, experienced massive burns. So Brother Wayne's going to share a little bit about that. We've got the former president of the United States declaring for the presidency just a couple of days ago on Tuesday night. So that's a powerful energy, and there were some other issues over the last couple of days. Special prosecutor coming in from Merrick Garland on Friday, and we both noticed as astrologers that Mars and Gemini happened to be exactly crossing the former president's sun precisely this past Friday when the special prosecutor was named, and the former president got rather angry about that. So Brother Wayne may bring up that. Then we've got a story that Wayne has brought up, and this is fascinating, about Mars maybe ripping apart one of its two moons. We could probably do a couple of episodes on this whole thing between Worlds in Collision by Manuel Velikovsky and some other things I've seen on what's called the Ancient Aliens show on History Channel, which I watch a whole lot. There's like 17 seasons, and there was actually something about Phobos possibly being an artificial moon. So Wayne will mention that. We've got this conference that just ended or is ending in Egypt about climate change. And one other point when you bring this up, Wayne, simultaneously, I've seen two very important things about the Amazon rainforest reaching its sort of final problem area, because that's devastating regarding CO2, and that's in South America, almost kind of parallel to what's happening with the climate thing. And I just thought maybe we could weave that in a little bit. And then I think you have something on Ukraine, right? And Poland and the errant missile in the last week, where everybody was worried, was this from Putin? Was it a mistake? And so on. And then one other one that we're going to share a little bit about, the leader of Saudi Arabia, known as MBS, and some kind of immunity that he's having after the murder of the writer Khashoggi, which was, I guess, if I remember correctly, at the embassy, the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey, and creating tremendous amounts of sort of horror and anger around the world and so on. So take it away. Why don't you do the first one? Then there's other things. We just had the terrible shooting in Colorado Springs, and I have some comments at some point about the Colorado state chart and even Colorado Springs. So that's another point. What do you want to start with, Brother Wayne? Go ahead.
I want to tie a ribbon around them all before I begin to deal with the details. There was a guy named Arthur Kessler who coined, his definition of the word synchronicity was certain things that like to happen together. And so Mark and I, and we're real clear on this, we're very conscious of this, of the synchronicities that happen around the world and how we astrologers can see the language that we form out of the horoscopes that we read matching synchronicities. And so, and that's a big driver for us when we are timing things. For example, the timing of this podcast and previous podcasts where we have been talking about home run hitters and then a home run record is accomplished during our podcast the minute that we mention it. Right. So, we're not strangers to synchronicity and the notion that when we are looking at a major event, such as the Pluto return in the U.S. chart, the transits of Neptune with respect to the U.S. chart, the Mars return in the U.S. chart, and it simultaneously being way out of bounds as it is at this moment, we know that we can look at the charts of not just the United States, but many other entities connected to the United States and see why are these things grabbing the headlines? And why are these if they're not grabbing the headlines, why should they be grabbing the headlines in some cases? And so with that, you'd wonder, how do we mix Jay Leno with Mars tearing itself apart and MBS? Well, it's because the planets that we're watching in the sky right now are hitting these people or these entities' charts.
Right.
And this Mars is the proverbial reflection of its own self. So here we are looking at and having spent a lot of time talking about the planet Mars symbol in the horoscope of the United States returning for the 131st time. By the way, this is not the America's first rodeo with Mars returning in its horoscope.
Yeah, about every 2 years, and this is a triple return. Go ahead.
Exactly. And previous returns, Mars, the planet of war, has synchronized with war. The war on Mexico was declared in May of 1846 during the Polk administration, and that was a Mars return, almost to the day. And, when you look at the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, which was the America's first aggressive action, basically, in World War II, that was a Mars return. So these every 2 years you can expect and look forward to, well, what's the American military doing? Or how's violence in the cities of the United States, which directly connects to the events that happened in Colorado Springs less than 12 hours ago, where yet another major mass shooting occurred in the United States involving dozens of people, with 5 people killed. So far, there are people critical. Well, what could an astrologer say about that the conventional wisdom in the media has it already covered? Well, how about if you do the horoscope of the United States, this is happening in America, and you look at where the planets are running, you'd say, well, I don't see any connection. Well, Colorado Springs is at 104 west longitude, which is near the U.S. moon line. And a moon in the country's chart is what concerns are there about the people for their safety of their families, their personal security, and their food and shelter. And there you go. It's that's the same basic line that runs through places like Oklahoma City, where, of course, we had the mass bombing in 1995. So
can I make a quick comment?
Oh, absolutely, Mark. Please.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't have to go into Colorado later, but just before we started, folks, without my showing charts to Wayne because it would be too complicated. Every state has a chart, so I pulled up Colorado, which is, oddly enough, an August chart in 1876, August 1st, 1876. And also our friend Mark Penfield, who did a lot of rectification work, horoscopes of the Western Hemisphere. I suddenly saw in my program, my software program, aside from Colorado, there's Colorado Springs. Okay, so I just wanted to comment here, and then you can go back to this point. As Wayne and I knew, yesterday was a Mars-Neptune square in the sky on Saturday. And they don't happen all the time, and the country was born with Mars square Neptune. So within 24 hours of this antagonistic, a square aspect of 90 degrees in the traditional astrology has a lot to do with friction and tension. It doesn't always have to be negative. But in this case, with America having this thing, and Colorado has had probably more of these shootings. I saw an article, so many of these things. There was the Aurora, theater shootings a number of years ago. That was horrible. The whole Columbine one, April 20th of 1999, is kind of almost like the starting point of a lot of this. We'll get into it another time, but that date of April 20th, April 19th and April 20th of every year, the sun is at 30 of Aries, going into 0 of Taurus. That goes back to the Battle of Lexington and Concord in 1775, the so-called shot heard round the world. And that was before the Declaration of Independence. Anyway, both Colorado and Colorado Springs are Leo, sun signs. And in Colorado, get this, where so many of these events have happened, Wayne, you'll find this really amazing. the Uranus position for Colorado entering the Union is 19 plus degrees of Leo. And Saturn has just stopped and is sitting exactly opposite their Uranus. And Uranus, when it's negative, is shocks and radical change and things that jolt you, kind of like lightning bursts. It can be very positive on a higher level. But also even in terms of things like when we study, unfortunately, assassinations of leaders and so on, Uranus is one of the key planets of this kind of thing where somebody might bring a rifle, a long gun, or whatever it is. And this is the scenario we're learning about. So Saturn exactly opposite the Colorado Uranus, and they have a celestial group. I mean, I'm not going to do all of these things. Almost every single thing I just looked at in Colorado's natal chart connects up to the U.S. chart. And Colorado Springs is also Leo, July 31, 1871, according to Mark Penfield. And Wayne, you'd find this fascinating. Colorado Springs, if this is the correct date, and Mark Penfield was a great rectifier, Colorado Springs as a city came into being with Uranus at 27 degrees of Cancer, which is opposite the U.S. Pluto exact. And they have a Chiron, which represents the need for healing or wounds. Colorado Springs has a Chiron return in Aries, almost precise right now. And that only happens every 50 years. Both of these places, Colorado and Colorado Springs, have a lot of Libra. And the moon currently is transiting Libra in the sky, just hit the U.S. Saturn, and is currently on our Juno. So I'm bringing it back to you, but the charts of the state chart and city charts, all of us live in a state, at least in the United States. We're in the country, which has the country chart, and we're in cities that are either founded or incorporated. They have astrology. Okay, back to you.
Again, Mark has just painted a picture of synchronicity and how certain things like to happen together. So in terms of time, certain things happen, whether it be halfway across the world in a place like the Sinai Peninsula, or in Colorado Springs, or in Qatar, where the FIFA World Cup is happening right now. I mean, it's Sunday, and the first game was supposed to be played on Sunday. And so I want to add one more thing to what Mark said, that there's another astrological lens into the timing of this Colorado Springs shooting, and then move on. When you do the United States horoscope and you convert the planets into their angular relationships to the Earth at the moment that the country was established, what you find is that there are horizontal crossing lines along 40 north, 40 degrees north latitude. And that embraces places. Colorado Springs is 39 north and I think 40 minutes. But that embraces places like Columbine, and it embraces places like Denver. And the crossing lines have an orb, in other words, north and south, a sensitive zone of at least 1 degree north and 1 degree south. And that's very conservative. I'm a very conservative astrologer. I don't go high orbs just to make something fit. And so that means you can go up to 41 degrees and you go down to 39 degrees. And anything that's wrapped across the United States in that belt, which coincidentally is 19 state capitals. Right. The United States Capitol, the White House, is at 38 north and 56 minutes. Right. So it's right there at the extreme of my conservative look. And, of course, there's New York City, where the towers were brought down. And so if you wrap that around the Earth even further and cross the Atlantic and go to places like Kosovo, what you find is during the war in Kosovo, all this violence, this air bombing in Kosovo, was on the same latitude as these events in Columbine. And the treaty that settled that war was the Dayton Accords, and Dayton, Ohio, is at 40 north.
And let's throw in Beijing because later on there's a lot I want to share about China. about what Christopher Wray is bringing up, police stations, quote unquote, sort of ad hoc in the United States, and also TikTok, which many people are on now, billions of people on this app. It's not just Facebook, it's TikTok. And he's warning that there's all this potential for devious stuff. And he's just been reporting I don't know if it was Congress, but in Washington over several days. And
yes.
These are kind of late-breaking things. And Wayne has just brought up this latitude area. It's just amazing what you just brought up. Dayton, named after Dayton. And by the way, wasn't there a mass shooting in Dayton? There was a couple of years ago, and that was in the news. Anyway, we could look it up, but Dayton was actually hit by one of these mass shootings.
And Mark, the planets that make those horizontal lines are wherever two planets cross. And you say planets don't cross. Well, on a map, when you're mapping them, mapping their angularity, folks, especially you astrologers who use relocation astrology tools, you'll find that planets cross, and at that crossing point, you put a ruler and you draw east-west across a world map. Well, again, as Mark pointed out, Beijing, China is 39 north and 57 minutes. So it's right there. It's right there at that 40 north. And back in 1999, I dubbed this the 40 north zone because it was about to be active. Moving on, why is that line there? Well, where the crossings are is very relevant to this country. Its map, and the crossings are in the Uyghur section of China, Western China. You have the moon on the midheaven, and you have Mars ascending. So this crossing line carries the qualities of moon midheaven, Mars ascending. So here we are in Colorado, and Mark has already pointed out the Leo Aquarian connection to Colorado. Well, the U.S. moon is in Aquarius, and it's midheaven quality in Colorado, and Mars is in Gemini, and we have Mars returning in the U.S. chart and out of bounds. So
let me just add one thing, because midpoints, which many of you don't know, like I've done telephone consultations for 50 years, and they are in the astrology shop over at Great Bear Enterprises, in case you want to explore the different kind of readings I have. But one of the things I've been doing, and I'm about to put this as a reading for folks, is midpoints. There's a whole dozens and dozens in any of your charts as individuals, anybody listening, in Wayne's chart, my chart, your loved ones, the start of a company, business, birth of a baby, any kind of thing. There are middle points between any two celestial bodies, and Wayne is bringing in all these angles, ascendant, descendant, the midheaven, the point below. So get this, you don't. This is just new for even Brother Wayne, because I was just looking at this an hour or less than an hour before we started. One other point, I mean, there are so many things that when Brother Wayne and I talk about this later, it's almost that one could have predicted, not necessarily where this violence would have taken place, but that Colorado itself would have something. The Mercury-Mars midpoint, this is a permanent midpoint for Colorado entering the Union. Mercury and Mars are both in Leo. They surround the sun as they're out of four planets, including Uranus and Leo. And the sun of Colorado is exactly at the Mercury-Mars midpoint in their chart from August 1 of 1876. Well, you just brought up, Mars is returning to its own position for the U.S. in Gemini, a sign ruled by Mercury. So Colorado is almost like, we spent a lot of time, we have a lot of other places we're going to cover. By the way, the fate point in charts, or two fate points, destiny points, are called the nodes. It used to be called the dragon's head and tail. Brother Wayne, you're going to find this fascinating. The northern node, or north and south nodes for Colorado, entering the Union 100 years and 1 month after July 4th, 1776, are 22 plus of Pisces and 22 plus of Virgo. And you brought up about Neptune and its discovery chart from September 1846. He and I have studied this over and over. It's in his book and so on. And that's exactly where Neptune is right now. And Neptune, when it's positive, is inspiration and love and creative vision and so much. And when it's negative or difficult, it represents confusion and uncertainty and all of these things that make us feel as if, how are we ever going to have a handle on it? There's so many different parts of this process here with Colorado and its latitude lines and the rising points and setting above and below, and now bringing in midpoints. We all have natal midpoints, dozens of them. And when all of you look for your transits, or you get a reading on your transits or your progressions, where the planets moved, there's this whole sort of subliminal realm of the middle points between planets and the sun and moon and amongst each other, and the angles of your own chart, as well as, again, transits and progression. So it is complex, just like what Wayne is bringing up about parans and crossing points on maps and so on. These are all significant points. So back to you again. I just wanted to, there's just so much there. Another time, depending on what happens with a State of the Union or a city, we can do this again. And obviously we could just share all about Colorado in this one session, and that's not our total plan here. So back to you.
Well, Mark, it's almost like when you approach these clues and you open the door, there's this flood of information. And,
right.
The world is complex, and we should never minimize it, and we should address it with as many of our best tools as possible. And here we are, two astrologers just endeavoring to do that. And so I'm going to tie these other synchronicities in, and quickly, but it's just fascinating. Jay Leno, who people might recognize as being a late-night talk show host, and he distinguishes himself from others by saying that he doesn't do vulgarity and profanity, and that's not his style. And, he comes across as a happy camper most of the time. He's smiling, an affable guy, and he collects cars, automobiles. He has apparently the world-famous collection. And he was tinkering around with one and with some gas, and the gas ignited and burned his face. Well, Mars rules the face, the head, in the physical body. And so the synchronicity for me was, well, so is there anything else that would tie Jay Leno into the synchronicities of the moment? And what I came up with was Jay Leno's, in his horoscope, and his horoscope is basically a certified horoscope set for April 28th, 1950. So he's Mark in my age. He's closer even to Mark because, and he has Mars at 22 Virgo and 11 minutes in an A-rated horoscope. Well, again, Mark and I are talking about where Neptune is in the sky, and Jay Leno has had a visitation of Neptune, essentially. I don't know if he was confused or maybe he was, not quite awake or what caused the accident to happen, any carelessness. But it was not gasoline liquid, but gasoline spray or gas. And Neptune is about gases.
Oh, one quick comment. Mars in medical astrology rules burns, obviously. I mean, maybe it's obvious to me. It rules accidents and anything that's acute. Anything that's acute is martial. Anything that's chronic, if we go back to Saturn's name from Roman mythology, Kronos. So these are little hints for everybody, okay? So when people talk about, we're not going to get into all these things, but obviously he suffered. And cars are mobile vehicles, even though he's got a whole bunch of them and it's in his kind of gigantic garage. But the point is probably every so often he or somebody goes around the block, his Mercedes, his this or that, whatever he got. And I did know, I mean, I never watched, all of his Tonight shows, but I see him periodically, and as a comedian, stand-up comedian, and so on. Now, everybody knows who he is. And by the way, he's just taken on the new Groucho Marx thing. You know what I mean? Groucho Marx had a show, and he's doing that. Okay. I want to say, what's my line? That's not it. But, You Bet Your Life.
Mark, I have to say this. It just jumped to mind. Jay Leno is reliving Richard Pryor's experience. So
wow.
Richard survived a
burn.
From freebasing, a drug, and after that, it totally changed him as a person, as far as the quality and the intensity of his delivery to the public, and he then became a messenger essentially to the public because of this experience. So I look forward to a quick recovery for Jay Leno, and I hope that lived experience brings the deeper essence of him out.
But one other thing, now you brought up another person, Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill, came out of nowhere to star in that first Star Wars. A lot of people will know this. He got in a car accident or a motorcycle accident. His face was disfigured. He had to have surgery. So this changed the young, very good-looking Mark Hamill, at the end of that first Star Wars, where he and Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, and so on, their characters, part one of what was going to be 3 parts, now it became 9 parts. And now he's still doing it. He's become the foil online against, in a sense, Donald J. Trump, former president of the United States. When the former president says something, you get Luke Skywalker. But here's the thing. He just had a birthday. And I hadn't ever checked his chart. He gets an AA rating, an exact birth time, from the place that Brother Wayne talks about. We go to a place called Lois Rodden's database, and they rate charts for exact birth time. Well, guess what? He is born with Uranus. His Uranus is exactly a 13 plus a Cancer, which is the United States sun position. So the key guy who was head of the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars winds up having the planet of radical change discovered March 13, 1781, the planet that turned around the American Revolution, giving America the victory 6 months later, October in Washington over Cornwallis in Yorktown. The whole war changed in 1781 after the discovery of Uranus in England. And it's just amazing that here we've now brought in 3 celebrities. Simply, this is how Wayne and I do this. Folks, sometimes we go so many hours, this is just being real honest, and then Brother Wayne will say, I have 1 minute left on the phone because I'm somewhere outside, he's outside. We'll have to do this later, and this is what we keep doing. So 3 amazing celebrities, all having some kind of medical or accidental thing. I'm sure when all of these different things, if anybody gets burned or somebody's in an accident, Mars is involved. That's all I can tell you.
Okay, Mark, I'm going to switch from the flames of Mars, the heat of Mars, and I'm going to the cold planets. Right. And so let's go to Buffalo, New York.
Right. Good old Buffalo.
Good old Buffalo. Headlines today and for the last couple of days has been about a snowstorm. It's called a lake effect storm that comes off of the lake, the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
And this is very early for this time of the year. And the reason this appeals and rang a bell in my head was as follows. Again, those lines that are formed on a map for the United States when you make a derivative map out of the horoscope and make a world map out of it so you can see where these symbolic lines are angular. You have Neptune, which is the highest elevated planet in the U.S. horoscope. You have Neptune directly overhead at 46 degrees west and 56 minutes. Now, I'm giving you 46, 56 because that is conventional knowledge. That's geography. That's on road maps. that's on any basic world map that anybody would get. You can figure out very quickly where that line runs. And where that line runs is between Buffalo and a place called Natural Bridge, New York State. And Orchard Park is just outside of Buffalo at 78 West, and Natural Bridge is at 75 West. And so in between them is 75 West 30. So in between there is going to be 76, late 76 plus. And so this storm happened on the U.S. Neptune midheaven line, running from, it runs from the pole all the way down. It runs through the White House. It runs through the Pentagon. It runs through the Washington Monument and keeps on going south.
Well,
And so here we have transiting Neptune in opposition to this position. And yesterday, it was exactly square Mars. And here is this storm. So I'm saying our tools give us the means to approach it with some kind of logic and understanding. And Mark's a master at spinning the narrative once that has happened. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, I'm going to spin something. And this is, folks, this is only because I'm got my computer in front of me, so I put in the chart for New York State.
No, this is because Mark is a New Yorker. That's why.
No, well, I could have put in the chart for New York City. This is actually the state chart from Poughkeepsie, July 26, 1788. And all of these charts, just so you know, we're in the United States, we're all living in a State of the Union. So aside from the U.S. chart, which does affect all of us, whether we know it or not, the state that we're living in is affecting us, and we're affecting the state back and forth, synchronicity.
As well as the towns and cities.
And as well as town cities. And every nation has its chart. Sometimes it's hard to figure out. And also there's reincarnation. Let's not forget that. Russia has had several charts. China has so many charts. It's a 5,000 to 7,000 year history.
We're on the Fifth French Republic. Fifth French Republic.
Right. And I've studied, unfortunately, a lot of those, particularly the last one. Get this, though. The chart based for New York, and what happens with these state charts is the President of the United States on a particular day is the key person who signs this order admitting the state. So this information is not like, well, it was a different day. No, it's not. Okay, July 26, 1788. Now, some of the rectification, a lot of these come from Mark Penfield, and he has studied this in his book, Horoscopes of the Western Hemisphere. So you're going to find this amazing, which I just am amazed with, because you brought this up and said, we're going to go from hot to cold, right? And this is unbelievable. The U.S., we have, in Welcome Planet Earth, the magazine I was fortunate to publish on Monday in Earth Astrology for 20 years, and a lot of my podcasts, these Mark Lerner Astrology Radio, Astroscope, that's on Great Bear Enterprises. The folder for this particular one with the charts, this is Podcast 104. You can find 100 plus podcasts. In this chart that was rectified for 12:57, just before 1 o'clock, by the President of the United States. Well, this wouldn't have been the President. This is part of the colonies, 1788. So this is just before Washington comes into power. So these are states that were sort of came into being, the original 13 colonies. But this has a particular date as well. Okay, so it's official. Mercury and Pluto are exactly opposite. Pluto wasn't even discovered until 1930. The U.S. has a Mercury-Pluto opposition from July 4th, 1776, within a 3-degree orb, 3-degree space. Wayne, this is exact. Mercury is retrograde at 16 plus a Leo, and Pluto is at 16 plus Aquarius. And according to this rectification, they're exactly on the meridian line in Poughkeepsie on the day that New York became a state. And what's amazing, because you brought up a cold, Pluto as the outermost planet, obviously very cold out there, 3 billion miles away. What people don't realize about Mercury, right, the first planet from the sun, is because it's like the moon where it has one face that it shows. According to astronomers, I think you know this, I mean, this is what I've seen over and over again, it's hard to believe. The other side of Mercury, which never turns its face to the sun, is the coldest place actually in the solar system. even colder than Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, because those planets at least are turning around. They're rotating. And Mercury doesn't. So I've read about this over and over. You don't want, let's put it this way. Nobody wants to live on the other side of Mercury. You don't want to live on the one closest to the sun, that face, and you don't want to live in the other one. But these two planets are exactly opposite. And New York, also, to bring in a political thing, this is why the Republicans are taking over the House of Representatives. Not because of, right-wing this or left-wing that. I mean, to some extent it was. But in New York, which is often, at least these days, very liberal, they lost several seats in the House of Representatives, 3 or 4. And with different representatives that they were not sort of like tuning in to their own district, they were doing things nationally and so on, they wound up losing their seats. So maybe the snowfall, I often think of this, I don't know if you feel the same way, I think you do, Wayne. Often we get weather events, and weather events are not separate from geopolitical events or just social, educational events, things that have to do with religion. What we see, just like with what Wayne is bringing up with latitude.
I agree with you, Mark. I agree with you, Mark.
Anyway, there's the chart. And here's the other thing. New York is a Leo state also, like Colorado. So we get 2 states, both Leo, with all of this kind of thing. By the way, the Mars position in New York State, 20 plus of Virgo. So Mars is in square to its own position, and as usual, a whole bunch of other things are going on in that chart. Back to you.
Well, there we go. Out of bounds, Mark.
What about Mars and Phobos? Can we talk about that a little?
Yeah, right on. Oh, by the way, before we move on, football fans, Cleveland Browns had to play Buffalo in Detroit. I don't know the outcome of that game, but it was supposed to be a home game for the Buffalo Bills.
They won.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, like 31-18. So the team, Buffalo, wound up winning. I didn't know they played in Detroit. I just saw that they beat the Browns.
Oh, yeah. They played in Detroit.
And the Lions played in New Jersey and beat the Giants. So talk about displacement. Detroit plays New York, which we just brought up, in New Jersey because they don't have any home games. They won almost the same score. It was like 31-16, and the Buffalo won like 31-18. So even the numbers are very similar. Weird.
It's woo-woo. Yep, that is. Okay, the planet Mars, the red planet, and folks, you got to get outside and look at the sky. You got to look up. It is so bright, and you can see it. It's between the stars Castor and Pollux. If you don't know where stars Castor and Pollux are, just Google it, and it'll show you. It's
and
right
they're the twins. They're the twins from Yeah, go ahead. Gemini.
It's right above the constellation Orion. Orion is the most obvious, easy to recognize constellation in the sky. And if you look above the left-hand star as you look at it, which is Betelgeuse or Betelgeuse, you'll see far off to the left and up, you'll see the red planet Mars. It's so bright. It is so bright. And by the way, it's way high up in the sky because it has a high declination today. It's at plus 24, 40 something, I believe, right now, Mark, headed for 25. And so, and by the way, within the next 24 hours, Mars going retrograde will return again in the U.S. horoscope. And so this is what's synchronizing this news event where this little story that says, this is from astronomers. See, everybody's got a hand in this game. Everybody's got skin in this synchronicity. And so the planet Mars, they say, may be ripping apart its moon. Yeah. Then, Mark.
Well, Phobos and Deimos, and this is an amazing thing. They're weird looking, and there's this whole other bizarre part of this story. I mean, we could do a whole thing on this. This has to do with Schiaparelli seeing what he thought was rivers flowing on Mars. He was an Italian astronomer in the 1870s. This started Percival Lowell thinking, Mars must have civilizations. He was an astronomer. He's the one who went to Flagstaff, Arizona. That's where Pluto became discovered. Once Pluto was discovered in 1930, and people understood the mythology of Pluto, suddenly Mars, which had always ruled two signs, first sign Aries, fire sign, and Scorpio, water sign, suddenly astrologers, and I don't agree with this at all. I'm not saying Pluto doesn't have a rulership connection to Scorpio, but I've said this over and over, and I will never change. Pluto has an orbit of 247 years. Mars has an orbit that goes around your chart, goes through every house in your chart, makes every single aspect in about 2 years. And in 2 years, Pluto will move like 2 degrees. And if you are a Scorpio sun, a Scorpio rising, moon in Scorpio, planets in Scorpio, and you accept the premise that Pluto rules Scorpio, you're going to be way off base. Pluto has an affiliation, and Mars and Pluto are connected. And we see this with this whole history of Pluto getting discovered. Why? Because an astronomer looks at Mars, right, and thinks that there are Martians living with canals. And then there was a misconnection about his word canalia and so on. You probably know a lot about this. But because this guy Schiaparelli did this, it turned on Percival Lowell in the United States. And then he went from New England and wound up in Flagstaff. And it wasn't him. He died looking for the so-called Planet X. And then his assistant, known as Comet Clyde Tombaugh, who was only 24, wound up discovering Pluto. And what's so fascinating about this, not to go on here, but Brother Wayne brought up discovery of Neptune. I brought up discovery of Uranus. These were discoveries by telescope, okay? One guy discovering William Herschel, became Sir William Herschel, discovered Uranus, thought it was a comet. Then 3 guys, and Wayne is the master of this. The final one was an astronomer, Gall, with his assistant in Berlin, with help from an astronomer in France and England. 3 key people. The symbol of Neptune is trident. That was also discovered by telescope. But Pluto was discovered amazingly because Pluto has so much to do with deeper kinds of things, underworld things, through photographic plates that had been taken of a certain area. And then it turned out that on February 18th, 1930, Clyde Tombaugh was looking through these things, and that's why we get an exact time for discovery of Pluto. It's like Eureka. He looks at something, writes down 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and realizes there's a planet that we didn't know about. And that was the search for Planet X. It's not the bigger planet that people are talking about, like Nibiru. There's got to be something out there even bigger. So at any rate, you just turned me on to this particular thing. But Phobos, also one other thing about this, an Ancient Alien show recently had a whole thing about weirdness about Phobos, that it's so unusual that it might be an artificial satellite. So I just wanted the public to know that we're onto it from this angle. Brother Wayne just brought it up in synchronicity with all of these, many of which are unfortunate events regarding Mars. What happened in Colorado, the snowstorm, has also killed people. And by the way, even though there's all that snow, I saw an interview, Wayne, and they had the mayor, I think, of Orchard Park, or Lackawanna, I think she was, and they said, well, what about driving anything? And then she was talking about the ice and so on. So, you can't just be driving around. You can create accidents there, which would then be martial accidents, car crashes, skidding, injuries and so on, having to go in a hospital. So even with extreme cold, which is kind of the opposite of the Mars principle, you can wind up getting martial events. Back to you.
Yes, and as above, so below. Here we are talking about the literal planet Mars and its moon, and we're tying it into events on Earth. And for my part, I call myself, since 1985, Earth Harvest, and all my work is done under that title. And
right.
That's what I like to do. I'm at Sun Gemini with my Mercury in Taurus, and I like to ground the information that I know. So again, I'm telling you, look up and see Mars and ground it in your intellectual experience here down on the earth. Now, I want to move on, Mark, to another thing that has to do with what one sees from space looking back at the earth. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, I don't even know if you ever knew that existed.
No, I
but
didn't.
Has officially declassified an image that was first tweeted by the 45th president in 2019. And the date came from the tweet. And you know, tweets are timed and dated. And so I looked at the date, August 30th, 2019. And there's, Mark, I'm about to open up a Pandora's box. Hold on to your seat. What we know is that there was an infamous phone call made by the president to the Ukrainian president on July the 26th of 2019. And we also know that there was a UN meeting that was supposed to have happened in September of 2019. And as a consequence of that phone call and that meeting, there was an impeachment.
Right.
And so let me go back to what this declassified stuff was. There is a base in Iran that the United States, and when you say intelligence agencies report to very few people. This is lived experience on my part because I was a member of the Army Security Agency, and I did this work for almost 3 years in Germany. And we Army Security Agency reported to the National Security Agency, and they had one customer, the President of the United States. The President of the United States, why? Because the President is the Commander-in-Chief of the armies, of all the military forces, and now even the Space Force.
Right.
And as the agency to make the intelligence actionable. And that's an important word there. There's a lot of things that we hear about when we watch the news on TV. We can't do anything about it. It brings to mind the serenity prayer. Accept the things you cannot change, have the courage to act on those you can, and then the wisdom to know that, the difference. Mm-hmm. And so as we look at these maps, so who can use this intelligence? Well, it depends. Did the Iranians know that we could take pictures of their nuclear and military bases from space with this degree of detail and clarity? No, they didn't. Okay. That's why it was classified. And right. So during this period of time that the president did things that caused him to be impeached,
right,
he was also doing other things, which were, you know, how the magician does the sleight of hands. You don't see what's going on over here, but you're looking at this thing that is being held up into your face. And so I thought I would put this here because this story just appeared today, and it's all part of the work that I have spent a decade doing to develop an idea of the American history, astrological experience of war using astrology. And again, one more thing that ties into this is the Pluto return. It has a line. The United States Pluto lines, there are 4 of them. One of them is on the midheaven angle at the top of the sky, like going out and seeing Mars, but you can't see Pluto with your eye. Through the Persian Gulf at 50 degrees east. Now, 50 degrees east is going to tie into another story that we're going to get to next. But 50 degrees east is Iran. The capital of Iran, Tehran, is 51 degrees east. And so when you're looking at these, that the United States has a satellite, and it's not just a satellite. It wasn't a space satellite. It was a special, super top secret plane or spacecraft that they could send over this area. So anyway, the Pluto return It's retrograding. It's continuing back and forth. And at this moment in time, we get this story about this intelligence that was basically misused,
right,
and put into a tweet, which is communications network on steroids.
Okay, can I? Yeah, thank
Go
you
ahead,
so
Mark.
much. That's a crucial thing. And again, Wayne's experience in intelligence in the Army, which I so appreciate. So much of his research that we share, when a lot of it we've done privately. Not that we couldn't do it, but I mean, this was for the last year or two when we did non-recordings, and then we realized, hey, we could do this thing. We came up with the name Out of Bounds because we both love astrology and sports, two guys talking sports and astrology. So get this. Okay. What I want to bring in here is the fact that, and Wade has been sharing this with me more than I've shared with him. Iran is providing drones to the Russians. The Russians are in that war with Ukraine that started in February. When that was like 3 to 4 days after our first of the 3 Pluto returns that are exact. We're in, as I've shared with Wayne, one of the things I want to remind everybody when we look at these mundane kind of things, the U.S. chart, and people around the world, astrologers, not just in America, everybody I shouldn't say everybody, but people who do mundane or earth astrology are aware that the United States is having these 3 Pluto returns, that we're going through this death or new birth and this transformation. All the Pluto themes are unbelievably strong, and it's never happened before. So the first one actually happened, and then the Russians began the war with Ukraine. The other one happened in July. I don't have the date in front of me. The last one is going to happen within the last 3 days of the year. By the way, Mercury is going to go retrograde December 29th, almost exactly with the 3rd exact Pluto return, and Venus conjuncts Pluto at New Year's. And I'll have, when we're near the end of this, I have a closing thing about Mars on the U.S. Uranus. I figured out it's not that hard, the 3 dates there that is going to happen. But the other thing that I wanted to bring up, because you so beautifully brought up, beautifully and scaringly, about this intelligence and the plane or the satellite and getting this thing, and then the tweet being very much a Gemini area. And let's remember the former president's sun sign, Gemini, born at a total lunar eclipse. The last sharing that you and I did, Out of Bounds, was about Mars retrograde and about this total lunar eclipse and other things that happened. Well, when COVID came out, actually just before COVID came out, and this ties back into Iran, and Wayne and I have shared this before, and I've thought about it a whole lot. This is when in Iraq, the United States decided to take out Qasem Soleimani, not in Iran. He was part of the Iranian government. And our country, this is a common fact, chose to get rid of him. Now, I remember Bernie Sanders, you may remember this, getting all upset. This was an assassination, he said, of this figure. And it would have been as if the equivalent, bless his soul, of Colin Powell. If Colin Powell had been singled out, and Saddam Hussein in those years, that was, they were born the same month, by the way, 1937 in April. And I put this into many articles. It was really fascinating. Colin Powell, an incredible figure who I thought would become the first black president, possibly. Then he had, the challenges at the UN under the George Bush Jr. administration, where they gave him what I believe, they made him share certain things about, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And I think it was very unfortunate that they did that. And I think he was very angry about it. He eventually shared that he voted for Obama. He moved from kind of the Republican ranks into Democratic ranks in the last several years of his life. Any rate, back to this story, we decided to get rid of this Iranian leader. And it was right at the beginning of January of 2020. And Wayne and I have shared together, just honestly, that and maybe it's fortunate that we're not involved, like there are many astrologers who work in the Indian government or advise, officials in different governments around the planet. We don't know if there are astrologers advising Putin, we know that President Reagan had his wife, Nancy Reagan. And Joan Quigley, and before Joan Quigley, who wrote a whole book about this, using astrology, set up meetings with Gorbachev and so on. It was a big scandal, came out in Time magazine, Astrology in the White House, like 1987. What I want to say here, though, and this is really crucial, I believe, unfortunately, during the Donald Trump administration, we almost went into what I call a hot war. It was all building up in the beginning of 2020 in Iran. And I studied this from the angle of the former president being born in a total lunar eclipse where the sun and moon are opposite during full moon, and trying to make a decision, which I always feel is inappropriate. If a person is born at a full moon, and many of you are born at a full moon is a good time of the month, which happens every 29 days. But if there's a quarter moon, a first quarter, last quarter, and you're born at full moon, that's not a great time to make decisions. In other words, each one of us has a sun-moon phase. Some of us are born during the waxing of the moon, when the moon is increasing in light between the new moon and the full moon. Other people are born in the waning cycle. I think it's okay if I share that you and I are both born in the waning cycle, right?
Yes.
The sun and the moon. Our country is born during the waning cycle. In fact, Thomas Jefferson, the main writer of the Declaration of Independence, was born in that same cycle. So talk about a guy who was in sync with the sun-moon relationship. The sun in Cancer, moon in Aquarius in the U.S. Declaration of Independence chart or national chart. Thomas Jefferson has that pattern, which is called a disseminating pattern. Dane Rudger in the Lunation Cycle book, one of his great books, he's a great teacher of mine, my foremost mentor, and I know he's a great teacher for Wayne. He has the same book. We've talked about it a whole lot. Anyway, back to this little thing, and then I'll be done. We did something that if I were in the government, all I could say is, don't do this. And here's the reason why. Osama bin Laden, without getting into all of that, was born March 10 of 1957-58. It turned out, and we have an exact time, by the way, for Osama bin Laden, a Netherlands researcher, Karen Hamaker, and she has a hyphenated name, got the birth certificate for Osama bin Laden from hospital records. So that's actually something. It took a long time. So we actually can chart who Osama bin Laden was, his whole history, which is unbelievable and so terrifying in terms of the World Trade Center and so many other, terrible things. It turned out that Qasim Soleimani, he was born one day, same year, of Osama bin Laden. And so we have two people. One was born in Saudi Arabia, Osama bin Laden, and Qasim Soleimani was born one day later the same year. They're basically time twins. He was born in Iran. So an astrologer, say, advising, Donald Trump, if you were in the war room saying, well, what do you think? This guy is in a car. He's in Baghdad. He's one of the Iranian leaders. We don't like Iran, whatever they're deciding. What would possibly go wrong, right, would be the question. I think that Wayne, I, and other astrologers into mundane earth astrology, if we were there, and I do feel at some point in the future, just like in the past in other countries, there are people with astrology knowledge who can help world leaders to avoid something. Well, they went ahead and killed this person. And that led to all of these other things. Our soldiers were shot, there was a bombing at our facility. Our government then conveniently lied about it. The former president said, oh, yeah, a couple of head injuries, that's it. It was much worse than that. And it wasn't just concussions, people in hospitals and so on. And a plane was downed. I think it was a Ukrainian plane. In fact, as I think back, it was a plane. If it was, then that's a remarkable synchronicity that I have forgotten about. There was a plane that the Iranians shot at by accident a couple of days later because of this whole confusion. And there were thousands of people, if not millions, turning out to the funeral of this person in Iran. And then COVID happened. And I believe, or whatever we call COVID, I personally believe, I'm just going to say this as a fact for me, that there are spiritual teachers, masters, a hierarchy, there's an invisible whole thing. That's where I feel our leaders come from around the world to test us and to play these powerful positions on the chess game of the earth and geopolitics. It's not just like, oh, yeah, I'm running for president or, whatever it is, like weird. There's synchronicity, as Brother Wayne was saying at the very beginning from Arthur Koestler and his his meaning. And I think a lot about Carl Jung as well, bringing in his concepts of synchronicity. I believe, as terrible as COVID and the pandemic is, that happened to prevent a hot war that goes back to the very point you're talking about, Iran and this intelligence thing. And as Wayne just said, and I'll throw it back to you, our Pluto is returning. And it's not just a death, rebirth, transformational crisis for America at these three high points or low points. You know, we had one in February, one in July, the other one in December. We're all in this massive plutonic tsunami with Neptune overtones or undertones. And there you go. Okay, in other words, is it possible that from the invisible side of life, and remember, viruses you can't see. These you have to look through a microscope, and they're constantly changing, just like the planets keep moving. We've got this whole other thing. It's just fascinating. Back to you. Thank you for bringing that up about this intelligence and all that. So this is what Wayne and I do. And I'm sorry to have shared longer than I expected. I didn't think we were going to even talk about it, but it's so fitting. And then let's bring back the other thing I want to bring about, that the former president has just declared on Tuesday, and then what happened on Friday. Bring that up, because that's one of your points.
Okay.
Just last week. Yeah,
I want to fill in some spaces that you left me. The Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752.
Okay.
Was an international civilian passenger flight from Tehran to Kiev, operated by Ukraine International Airlines. And on January 8th, it was shot down by the Revolutionary Guards shortly after takeoff, killing 176 passengers. I want to tie something personal to this. Again, this happened.
And this is way before the whole war. Go ahead.
Yes. So this is January 2020 that this happened. And my book, written and published in November of 2019, speaks of the latitude at 35 north that runs through Tehran and Kabul and Bagram and Port Bragg and other places. It's right on the cover of my book.
Right.
And this airport was at 35 degrees north and 51 east. So it's under the Pluto line, and it's in the horizontal Paran branch of what I call the war impulse pattern for the United States. Mm-hmm. Now, I went to Africa in 2017, in July, August, and in July 2017, the end of the ISAR, the mop-up in Mosul, Iraq, was occurring. So they detoured all of the international passenger flights from traveling over Iraqi airspace. And to my surprise, on the trip back in United Arab Emirates airplane, we were flying over Iranian airspace. And I was watching the monitor, and we passed over the city, the religious center where the theologians get their education. And I don't want to mess it up and pronounce it wrong, but it's spelled Quqom. We passed over that city and between that city and Tehran. So the airplane from 30,000 feet, we crossed over 35 north, 51 minutes. And it was astonishing for me, and I must have looked like a madman in the plane, standing up, pointing at the monitor saying, "Folks, do you realize where we're at?" It's like, it's a good thing they didn't have security on the plane. Anyway, Mark, one more thing I want to say with respect to this. There was a direct tie-in between Ukraine, Iran, and the assassination of Soleimani. And so when you look at these kinds of connections, folks, for the listener, these are the synchronicities you can't even understand because people point at them and say they're coincidence until you have the tools that Mark and I use, the horoscope, the birth of dates, the event dates, and the different tools that spin off of that. And then you can see, you can understand the relationship. Because, synchronicity is just the basic thing that synchronicity is doing is saying you're all united, you're all connected. Remember, the United States is the United States. And our what is our motto? E pluribus unum, right? Out of the many. Out of
many, one. Out of many, one, right?
And so, we're not dealing with something that is far-fetched here. We're dealing with something that is on the map of all of us if we have the time to look at it. Go ahead, Mark.
I got to intervene. In where I live, Mars is exactly rising right now, in the sky. By the way, the reason we chose today, it was general. I thought maybe we'd start earlier. Forces are at work. Again, the terrible situation in Colorado. And so many other areas. There's still an investigation in Idaho, in Moscow, Idaho, a small town. You saw that too a couple of days ago. College kids, they're scratching their heads. Terrible tragedy. 3 people killed.
Yes.
In Virginia, football players on a team shot and killed at the University of Virginia by a former player who apparently was on the team. I don't want to get into all of this now. There's another point I want to bring up about this, about Mars here at the moment, just because it's exactly hitting this point, which is I want to bring up something that it's not a forgotten point, but I shared this with Wayne the other day. We're about to have a new moon on Wednesday in Sagittarius. In fact, tomorrow, Mercury and Venus are conjoining. They don't do this all that often in Sagittarius in the next 24 hours from now. So we have this wonderful connection. Talk about things that are positive. Mercury, Hermes, the messenger of the gods, communication, business, medicine, so many other things, words and language, merging with Venus, the planet of love and creative artistry. GPS astrology, one of our keynotes is Goodwill is Love in Action, coming out of my work with Lucis Trust. That you can go to that website, Lucis, LUCISTRUST.org. All the Alice Bailey teachings, 24 amazing volumes of books, free literature, going to full moon meetings for many years, and then going to Scotland at the Findhorn community, where one of the big keynotes, and again, there's a whole page on this linking the two centers, all your needs will be met. One of the keynotes of Eileen Caddy at Findhorn, and I wound up going there and living there 3 years, brought a tarot deck. There is now, in fact, our Out of Bounds that Wayne and I are doing, this is the 4th episode, is in GPS Astrology, the last 2 issues. It'll be in the next one. It's on the Mark Lerner Astrology website, again, Astroscope, and it's on YouTube because it's on this new site that my daughter Katya, who is the designer of GPS Astrology and does so much of the work with Great Bear and so on. So she pulls out all the stops to make the beautiful art and so on. At any rate, the reason I just wanted to bring this up is the new moon that's going to happen around 2:57 p.m. Pacific time, 5:57 this Wednesday in early Sagittarius. What's happening at that point is Mars is going to be exactly rising in Washington, D.C. And you asked me to mention these other places. For a planet, any planet to be exactly rising above at the midheaven, setting, or below. When I say exact, in this situation, it's exact. It's 5 minutes of arc, 1/12 of 1 degree. And here's the thing: these are not estimated charts. It's not like going to Lois Rodden's place saying, "Well, it's an A, it's a B." It's from memory. And this is part of global hotspots, new moons and full moons on the Great Bear website, which I do every 2 weeks when there's a new moon or full moon or eclipse. So the advantage of the stuff that we do with new moons and full moons and maps based on all this is you have an exact time. Okay, we have everything for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. These are not approximations. Okay, we know exactly the moment of a new moon. Thousands of years ago, they didn't know when there was a new moon because they didn't have a telescope. To the ancients, the new moon was always the following. 2 or 3 days after an actual new moon that they couldn't see, they would see a thin crescent moon reappear in the western sky after sunset. That's why, like the Jewish religion, many religions are based on a new moon, but not the new moon that we're aware of when you look in the newspapers as new moon, right? Exact time? No, the new moon was when it appeared as a thin crescent because they didn't have the advantage of telescopes. So the reason I'm bringing this up is in Mundane and Earth Astrology, what Wayne and I are bringing up, all of these crisis points, the points that you just brought up that we've now shared about Iran, Soleimani, we could have gone into a hot war, maybe somehow or another COVID, as terrible as it's been, again, an invisible virus. And by the way, let's after this go back to our pet peeve, right? The stadiums. I'll throw that to you so we can talk about this. This is very important. This is a football day. Yesterday was a football day in the United States. There's basketball. There's what's happening in FIFA over in Qatar, or however you pronounce it. So we got to get into that and all the thousands and millions of people going into stadiums. At any rate, my concern, particularly with Mars and Gemini, is Gemini rules the lungs. And we've got all these sporting events, and people want to be active. They don't want to be cooped up anymore. And what we've got in China, a net zero kind of policy, people in hazmat suits preventing, a terrible outbreak in the United States and so many other places. It's like what I call almost like a mass suicide pact. It's like people don't realize that, they may go to a game, nobody's wearing a mask, so many thousands of people are jammed together, and people say, well, it's outdoors, what's the big deal? It's not like we're breathing the same air indoors. But a lot of these people, even if they don't bring their kids, will go home. And now we're having all this outbreak of children's flu things, very serious in many places. It's just unbelievable. So let me turn it back to you on that score, because Mars is not only rising right now on the West Coast and Northwest where I live, but it's going to be exactly rising at the new moon this Wednesday, when Jupiter, by the way, exactly goes direct after retrograde. So we got this Jupiter effect, and we could talk about that. And these are significant things. And all this is taking place in the United States from the fall equinox on September 22nd, when Uranus was exactly rising. Well, my concern in looking at these new moon and equinox charts is we're in a 90-day cycle, and I've been watching this and these events around the world ratcheting up. And Uranus was exactly rising in Washington, D.C. at September 22nd. We're not done with the cycle, folks. That cycle ends at the winter solstice, and then a new 90-day cycle. And within this 90-day cycle, the next new moon, which could be auspicious under Sagittarius, sun and moon, and we're having Mercury and Venus together in Sag tomorrow, and Jupiter goes direct. All that's great, except for one thing. Mars is exactly on the ascendant. Mars can be good. It can be warriors. It can be leadership. It can be pioneering. Wayne and I know this from all our work. It can be your passions, things you love to do, using your muscles, exercising, all kinds of sports, and so on. But it has a shadow side like every planet, and that is the shadow side of burns, like with Jay Leno, or accidents, people cutting themselves, people going too fast, people being, shall we say, aggressive rather than assertive. So when we overdo the Mars function, or when we see it happening, like what happened with Khashoggi, the writer Khashoggi, a horrific experience. And now, going back to this whole thing, the leader of Saudi Arabia, that's another thing you brought up, has supposedly been given immunity somehow. Back to you.
Back to me from Mark. Mark is spelled M-A-R, and Mars
right.
is M-A-R.
There you go.
Enough said. There you go. Okay. Yeah, and what Mark was saying is that under this lunation event, we're going to have Mars rising in Washington, D.C. at the White House, right. Literal. What he didn't say was that Mars is on the angle in Brasilia. He didn't say that Mars is on the angle in Crimea, in the Crimean Peninsula. He didn't say it was exact at Ankara, Turkey. And so the United States isn't the whole show. It's an international show. And where when he does his maps, he's saying, folks, you got to spread your vision. You got to have a greater gestalt because all of these things are related. And just as we showed the Iranian airline shot down in Iran's airspace at their airport, connected to an event that happened in Iraq, connected to the United States reaction to it in Washington, D.C., the strings, they're long and they're connected.
And Ukraine, like my memory served me, it was a Ukrainian flight, which I find to be even more remarkable, like you just said, the strings. January 8th, you said, was the shoot down accidentally. It's not that the Iranians wanted to do it. Somebody supposedly made a mistake, unless there was some kind of deliberate thing, to shoot down that Ukrainian national, jet. And that was 2 years before the Russians wound up starting that war. And when did they start it? When our Pluto came back within 3 days.
Let me make a further connection, Mark. We just had a harrowing, and I intentionally use that word, a harrowing experience of a Russian barrage of missiles into Ukraine, and one of them is shot down by a Ukrainian defense missile, landing in Poland, 4 miles across the border. Imagine, when you're up in space, you don't see these borders, but on the ground, man has marked his territory like a dog pisses on hydrants. And so you find this situation where now NATO has to decide whether or not that's a provocation to trigger basically a DEFCON response to the
Article
Russians.
4, Article 5.
Not 1 inch of soil, Polish soil. And so I see that the situation that occurred in Iran with Soleimani and the accidental shooting down of the Ukrainian plane. Ukraine is the common character in both of these. United States is the common character in both of these. Was folks, wipe your brow. Do we really want to go there?
Okay.
Anyway.
And let me bring up another thing. I wasn't planning to do this, but this morning or last night when I went to sleep, they talk about a picture of, I believe in psychic photography. Brother Wayne has written something that will appear about daguerreotypes. So let's leave that for the next time. But you have just done an amazing amount of research that has changed your life about history of photography. And he and I have shared so much about Neptune, which particularly connects up to all this. And I have studied this ever since I was a little kid. We had all these Polaroids in my family in a drawer in the living room. And I used to just sit there. It would, like, the history of my mom and my dad and grandparents and uncles and aunts with all these pictures, like in scrapbooks and things like that. Last night, I'm going to sleep, and I turned on a news thing, and they show a picture of Kim Jong-un with the first time ever. He has a couple of daughters or a couple of kids, but they've never been shown in public. And they showed a picture. Talk about a picture being worth 1,000 words. This would be 1,000,000 words. They show a picture. They showed a kind of video of him walking with the little girl. She's 9 years old. Okay. So this was the first time ever that this happened. He allowed a photographer to photograph him walking with his 9-year-old daughter. So it was like remarkable news. What the thing that they showed was a photograph with his back turned and the little girl as they were in front of the biggest missile on like one of these carts like that would go when they do their May Day things in Russia and North Korea and other places trying to tout their unbelievable thing. I mean, at the Kremlin, they do this every May 1st. And that's part of this, what I wanted to mention about Poland, because I have shared about my 83-year Jupiter cycle back on my podcast, the Jupiter every 83 years rather than 84 years, which would be the so-called 12-year Jupiter orbit is not 12 years, it's 11.86, and I discovered this in 1995. So I've been sharing to the public this whole year and even last year, reading in my podcast, hey, we're repeating 1939. If you had 1939, 83 years, 2022, every single day, Jupiter is back to where it was. So it's not as if we're repeating everything exactly, but Jupiter is, and Jupiter is the biggest planet. Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is you just brought up Poland. That's where World War II began on September 1 of 1939. If we accept that as the beginning, that's when Hitler from Germany, we won't go into all the details, but it happened around 4:45 in the morning, and it was a whole ruse that how it was. But they had created the Russian-German non-aggression pact on the day of the Mars station on August 23rd. Shocked the world, 1939. So now Jupiter this whole year, every single day is exactly back to where it was in the zodiac. I mean, like within a couple of minutes of all arc, not approximately. It has to do with the exactitude of the Jupiter cycle. So of all the things that could happen to start a new war, Ukraine is not part of NATO, but Poland is, as well as these other countries. And so as Wayne was just saying, this is, he and I have talked about movies like The Sum of All Fears and 13 Days having to do Cuban Missile Crisis, The Sum of All Fears, these different movies based on accidents or weird kind of things. Or, like in other words, nobody wants to deliberately necessarily create a nuclear war. I don't think Putin, with all of his difficulties, if he wanted to do something crazy like that, which would destroy the planet, he would have done it. But we get all these fears, we get all these threats. So the picture of Kim Jong-un, right? The publicity is amazing, of a little girl that we have never seen before. That is a country, as they call it, the Hermit Kingdom, that has never, at least in modern times, had anything but three people. The grandfather, then the father of Kim Jong-un, and him. And it's in front of a giant missile. What is that saying? And they just have been creating all these missile launches over the Sea of Japan and so on. And he comes out, talk about something that's like, oh, I'm a loving father, right? I'm showing you my daughter. I'm not going to do anything weird, but if you guys keep hassling me over in the West, we have this giant missile, and it was just one missile, Wayne, but the biggest thing you could ever see. And I looked at that. That was like less than 24 hours ago.
Yeah, I saw it.
Bringing up Ukraine and Poland, and if they start, Poland was very upset. We didn't even know was this a Russian missile? You're saying, as I think now we realize, the Ukrainians were trying to defend themselves, and they're getting all of this technology, right? All these military weapons from the United Kingdom, from the United States, from Germany, and so on. Meanwhile, the Iranians are giving drones to the Russians. This is exactly how World War I and World War II began. Yep. All these alliances, all these different things. And then, like in the movie 13 Days and JFK in this particular movie. And in reality, talking about the Guns of August, which won a Pulitzer Prize, about how different governments couldn't see what was about to happen. And then we get into supposedly the war to end all wars, which it wasn't, with all the gas. You just brought up gas with Jay Leno in an individual way. And the horrific things that started in World War I. And this was, by the way, that was 11 years. 1914 was 11 years after the airplane was invented. What do? We start killing ourselves with airplanes. I mean, this is unfortunately this negative side of humanity. Why do we have to invent things, right, through Uranus and Neptune, Pluto, Jupiter, Mercury, Sun, Moon, Venus? All these different planets are here to lift us up and create goodwill. And we take these inventions and we have to destroy things. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, nothing to be sorry
it's
about.
The Mars rising, as you said, Mark has MAR at the beginning. Go ahead.
Right now, Mars, while you were talking, rose here in Sacramento, California. So okay. I now have 24 degrees Gemini on the...
The ball has been passed to you.
Okay. So let's go to something else that involves Mars, sports, and in America nowadays, sports on steroids. So I'm watching Saturday football games yesterday. Yesterday was the day that the Mars Neptune was exact, square in the sky. And it's held at the University of Michigan Stadium. And I tell Mark later when we have a conversation, Mark, there were 110,433 people in that stadium. And I watched the whole game, and every time the camera turned to the stands, I desperately looked for somebody wearing a mask.
Right.
And it's Mark and I have to admit, FDR said nothing to fear but fear itself, but we have something to fear because we know there's something there. And the games that are being played between the Western civilizations and China, which considers itself a civilization, not a culture, not a nation, a civilization, and how they handled the COVID outbreak, the pandemic. One does the prescriptions are diametrically opposed. It's just incredible. In one nation, in one sphere of influence, 1 billion plus people are told zero COVID. And in the rest, not even the rest of the world, because some of the world is totally neglected, but in the Western powers for sure, it's inoculations, it's social distancing, or at least it was until everybody decided the impact on the economies, the capitalistic, the flow of commerce, the ability to have the population working was so great that they would take what I think they think is the lesser of the evils and allow there to be acceptable losses. I believe that our society, in America, the United States, and in Europe have taken the gamble, just like the Chinese have taken the gamble, that our approach is the right approach and that other country is going to catch it because they made the wrong decision for their people. And so here we have just one football stadium in the United States. I know I'm getting strident. March was just rising. One football stadium out of many. How many games were played yesterday? I mean, I watched the Texas game and the Oklahoma game and the Georgia game and the, huge stadiums packed with people. I don't even know how to make that count. I am up where Mark is Oregon. Did Oregon play in Oregon or were they on the road?
No, well, you brought up a good point here. Oregon, we've been having talk about snowstorm in Buffalo Orchard Park. We didn't have that, but on the day of the total lunar eclipse, right, and this last 2 weeks, we have had the coldest. I've been out here 38 years in Oregon. It's been so cold. It's been like in the 20 degrees. It was like got down to 30 degrees at night. Now it's in the 20s. Okay, that happens in December and January. It's never happened this early. Okay. They decided to play the game against Utah. Oregon was at home at Autzen Stadium, one of their great places. They lost for the first time last week to Washington Huskies right at the end of the game. But speaking of Pluto, this is you have an amazing ability to bring in something, from as above so below, as below so above. So the Oregon quarterback was injured. Okay. His last name is Nix. You said the Georgia game. The Oregon coach has come from Georgia. He's the youngest coach. I believe he's now the youngest coach of all the college football teams in the first division. And they lost at home for the first time last Saturday to Washington Huskies. Okay, our northern neighbor. Right, a big game. Oregon, Washington every year. So last night, Utah and the Ducks were both 8-2. And Utah had beaten the Ducks twice last year. So the Ducks were looking for revenge. They made the game start at 7:30. This is all money, right? It was so cold out here. Normally, duck weather is rain. The ducks and rain and so on. It's not like 20-degree weather is not really duck weather. Maybe it is, but I don't think it is. At any rate, they managed to just hold on. And the quarterback, his last name is Nix. And we've discovered that aside from Pluto having Charon, which Pluto was discovered in 1930, then 1977, same year that Chiron was discovered, astronomers saw that Pluto was really almost like a double planet that we could get into another time. Wayne has brought up Phobos. It's one of the two odd moons of Mars. The other one is Deimos. They're named from Latin, fear and panic. There's a whole other story about that. That's what the names mean, Phobos and Deimos. Meanwhile, Charon, the ferryman from the realm of Hades and Pluto, ferries the souls of the dead, right, to the other world. And by the way, Mercury or Hermes is also involved in the whole thing. And I said earlier, New York has Mercury opposite Pluto exact as a state. The U.S. has Mercury retrograde in Cancer opposite Pluto and Capricorn, 3 degrees, one of the big alignments for the U.S. So here we have this whole other story. I just wanted to sort of encapsulate it of what you're saying here. There's just so much going on with these particular planets. There's a couple more things I'm going to share about later, but I want you to, continue with what you were just sharing, okay, or to highlight. And I think you wanted to talk about the soccer, what's happening there. If we go there for a moment, if you don't mind, Ecuador beat the host team. That was what happened today, 2-0, okay. Ecuador, and it became, MBS is there, Sisi of Egypt is there. I'm not sure who's representing the United States, but the group of people, again, the weird synchronicity and the terrible synchronicity of the killings in Colorado, okay, where there is so much at a club that has to do with gay and lesbian and Q, different people there just wanting to have a good time. This horrendous event happened a couple of minutes before midnight. Again, this was at the end of yesterday when Mars and Neptune were squaring, and Saturn in Libra was activating all these Colorado planets, unfortunately. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, $200 billion has been spent in Doha to make all this happen. Part of the backstory here, there's all this scandal. They paid all these people all this money for like the last 10 years. They abused these people. So the head of FIFA is having to sort of like do this, whatever you want to call it, apology kind of thing. So he was there, and all of these sort of odd individuals were there, and they spent all this money. They developed a great team of the host country. So the first game was played, and they lost it to Ecuador. And one other thing that I found out, I started reading this morning because I didn't know how often is the World Cup played. It started, Wayne, in 1930. And Uruguay, and I read this whole history of Uruguay, which is in South America, getting its freedom from Brazil back in the 1800s. I was reading about Montevideo, their capital, all this other stuff I didn't know anything about. They have a population of about 3 million people. They won the first World Cup in the summer of 1930. This is during when Pluto's discovered. This is the beginning of when, Germany under Adolf Hitler and Mussolini and Mao and Stalin, and the beginning of the Great Depression is happening right after the discovery of Pluto. That's when the World Cup. So is it a surprise that now they spend $200 billion? And that's Pluto too. Pluto is extreme wealth and extreme almost anything, or extreme poverty. It can be one or the other. And scandal of the underworld forces. And it's just the simultaneity. In Colorado, we have an event, and around the world, they have this thing. And the only thing I wanted to say was there's great disappointment tonight there. And you might want to talk about it because you brought up the thing, they're not selling beer, and there's other things that they're not allowing Jewish people to cook. So there's all of these crazy things, and they want it to be great celebration. Maybe the Mars-Neptune square is part of this thing creating, this crisis, because that does not happen all that often, Mars square Neptune. Go ahead.
Well, my take, my lens has always been, Mark, and you know this from 1987, you published it in Welcome to Planet Earth, is the presence of that Pluto midheaven line. I consider planets, when they're at the midheaven angle, that means they're public. That means they're observable. That means that they are visible, as opposed to being underground at the nadir. And the different angles all have a different quality to them. And so when I'm looking at a chart, I have to factor in the fact that a planet is rising or on the midheaven angle, descending, or at the nadir. And of course, that is why I was so interested in Michel and Francois Gauquelin's work on angular planets, particularly the Mars effect zone. So when you look at the United States relocated to Qatar, to Doha, to those stadiums, you find 51 degrees east is the longitude. And so it is like within miles of the heart of the U.S. Pluto midheaven. So it's not far. It's extremely close. And so if that planet, Pluto in this case, were transit active, then it would be activated. We would see expressive. We would see things happening. And so, of course, that's the case because Pluto is returning in the United States horoscope. And so when I see Pluto in midheaven, as Mark puts it, the worst expression, not the highest spiritual, not the highest possible, not the positive, because Pluto, when you look at the negative Pluto that the United States in particular has experienced in the Persian Gulf, it's all those oil derricks on fire during the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War, creating all of that horrendous pollution, fires lighting up the sky, black smoke covering everything for hundreds of miles. That's a vision of Dante's Inferno. That's a vision of what people fantasize hell as being like. And so, but when you take it and you are a little more sophisticated with the way you look at it, Pluto is manipulating power in the Persian Gulf. It's puppet leaders. It's assassinations and overthrow of legitimate governments. It's the CIA presence. And again, I'm speaking from the point of view of America's lived history. I'm not talking about any other country. I'm saying this is how the horoscope of the United States relocates to this place. And this is the lived history for 100 years. And so now, how do we look at this? We find that Mohammed bin Salman has been given the pass go ticket. So at least from the United States perspective, he is not. He can't be prosecuted for the murder, the butchery, and the hacking up of this guy Khashoggi in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul, which I have been to on several occasions, and I've been near that building. It's just amazing that you can even imagine that a man could walk off the street, as prominent as this guy was, walk into this embassy and not walk out. Okay, so having said that, so here are people who are literally, they're not bothered to appear in public. And so what I did earlier today was I said, what is the security for the FIFA events? They've got a bunch of stadiums. What is the security? And I don't necessarily mean the private security provided through Qatar. I'm talking about nearby on the island of Bahrain, it's the United States Central Command. What is the security, the national security interest of the United States to this event, this long-lasting event, widespread event involving many, many people, involving visitors from all around the world, particularly from Western European countries? how is it being defended by the militaries of the nations involved? And, I couldn't find anything as I expected, like whether or not a new aircraft carrier, whether there's a submarine that's made a show, whether or not there's any kind of a DEFCON alert, whether or not. But my concern is this. Just like I'm concerned about the stadiums in the United States being targets, not just for COVID, but for all the other bad things that the negative spin that has been in all the media about fear, Phobos, and that no, you can't be a responsible nation or nations and not make a very serious effort to make sure that something's in place so that you don't even have one incident. You can't have one bomb go off. You can't have one bad thing happen. You can't have anybody, kidnapped. None of that stuff can happen. So, Mark, here they are under the transit-active Pluto line for the United States. And are Americans going? Are British nationals going? How about the French? What about, and what about the teams that are playing? Is there an Israeli team there?
No, I don't think. Well, I don't know, but I don't think so.
Okay. So I don't know the qualifying teams. But anyway, Mark, that's it. I just teed that up. You have anything?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a bunch of things. There are a couple of things that are surprises. I've got a gift for you about an astrology thing this often happens. Brother Wayne often has to deal with the fact that I have different hours than he does, and I'm often at 3 or 4 o'clock or 5 in the morning. I go to my computer and I found something that's kind of mind-blowing for you and for me, and I don't think you and I have ever done this. I know I never did it, so I'll tee that up in a little bit. I do want to talk about the United States and China from a slightly different standpoint, but you brought up, this is part of the same thing. So with the soccer, they call it football, of course, and we call it soccer. I'm not getting into the whole history, but that's also fascinating. I was looking up the first soccer game was like in Scotland, in the 1870s. So there's all this history. But again, it is interesting that the World Cup began in 1930 and Uruguay won. Okay. And after all of this money spent, and by the way, you brought up the thing about beer, what was it, the last minute? Because again, this is two guys talking sports and astrology. Turns out they're... And Mark,
Budweiser. It's sponsored by Budweiser.
But they won't let people... Yeah, because of the religious part of this stuff having to do with the Muslim religion, I believe they declared in the last 24, 48 hours, you can't drink it in the stadium. It's not like, like in baseball stadiums or football saying, hey, I'm going to get a beer. I'll be right back. Get a hamburger or Frankfurter, you know what I mean? I'll get pizza, whatever it is. I'll be back in a few minutes, and you get your beer, you get whatever it is. I mean, talk about getting into America, prohibition, getting rid of prohibition, booze, the whole thing. I mean, I find I don't want to go here, but like someday we have to do this thing. As a little kid, one thing I was always amazed when you read about dinosaurs. The thing is, they actually happened on this planet. It's almost like a movie. Oh, that must have happened somewhere else. No, Triceratops, Brontosaurus, Tyrannosaurus Rex, all of these creatures, getting destroyed, going through the whole history of the Earth. And it's so weird because they don't exist right now. Well, the same thing with all of this stuff that we're talking about. I mean, in America, we actually had prohibition. I mean, for 14 years. We thought that was like a good idea somehow, or somehow that happened. I mean, that's 100 years ago, or approximately 100 years ago. And people now, every time I go to one of the little stores like a 7-Eleven, almost every time I'm in there, like to do like some little thing, newspaper, some tiny little thing I'm going to get, coffee, somebody's going out with 2 6-packs and so on. There's like all the time, 24/7. Any rate, apparently they declared and got everybody upset. See, this created another problem, that the beer or alcohol would not be served inside the stadium. Now, again, the home team that had been developed lost. They never had a shot on goal. Tonight, the only game, or today, Ecuador beats them, complete surprise, 2-0. The home team doesn't have a shot on goal. All these celebrities are there, right? The guy from Italy in charge of the whole thing. The sheik who spent, a family that runs this country, putting in all this money from all over the world using workers. I mean, talk about Carmen Dharma, right? Who abused workers, and there's a whole scandal with that, and MBS is there, and there's been a whole conflict between Saudi Arabia and this very country, and you're bringing up about the Pluto return. What I wanted to, I lost track for a moment, but the whole thing like that you brought up so wisely and synchronicity-wise, our country somehow, we have sort of waved the flag of surrender to COVID, flu, or whatever it is. There's no way on earth, unless something was so extreme, that Americans going to go back to wearing masks and social distancing, whereas in China, with 1.2 billion people, 1.2, 1.3 billion people, they're going around still with hazmat suits and so on. On the same planet, one country is doing this extreme thing, and we're doing the opposite. But I want to bring this up. This is going to take a couple of moments. In the middle of the night, there's two things that I need to share before we stop, and I'm willing to go longer. And if people don't want to go 2.5 hours, well, then don't go 2.5 hours. But I want us to go a little longer if you can do it, because there's a couple of things, and there's a gift that I want to give to you that will be mind-blowing, and it's a gift also to myself. It has to do with an astrology technique called composite charting. But this is a different composite charting that I don't think you've ever done. If you have, then it's still extraordinary. So number one, what's the difference between the U.S. chart, which we know back and forth, and the chart for China, which comes in on October 1, 1949? Now, this is not the China chart from Sun Yat-sen in 1912 or from 1,000 years ago. There have been many different charts for different countries. We're a young country, so we only have July 4th, 1776 as the main chart. We have a constitution chart. We've got charts of the Supreme Court. We've got charts of other things and state charts and so on. But one national chart. Mao being successful with his communist revolution, October 1, 1949, mid-afternoon, Beijing. Apparently, they had astrologers, coming up with that particular chart. Now, what I wanted to talk about is this. Why is America behaving the way we're behaving, and why is China? And it's really right in the heart, and then I would like your comment about it, okay? We have a chart of the sun in Cancer and Venus conjunct Jupiter rising ahead of the sun. So my book that is out of print, Mysteries of Venus, I've studied this for 40 plus years out of my 50 years. Venus is Venus is a very unusual planet in astrology that for 9.5 months, it's rising ahead of the sun, and then we call it Venus Lucifer in a positive way. Lucifer meaning the light bearer, not Satan, not negative, the bearer of light. So in Venus, in your chart to the public or anybody out there, Venus can be rising ahead of your sun or behind it. When it's behind, it's called Hesperus, which means setting in the west. So I studied all this, not everything in my book, but it's a big part of my book, and I give all of these several hundred people the exact degree arc between Venus and the sun. How many degrees? And Venus can only be 48 degrees in front of the sun or rising ahead of it when you're born, or 48 degrees behind. So the United States is a country with not only Venus rising ahead of its sun, which is what we call kind of Lucifer, the light bearer. Venus, in a way, on the day of America's birth, even though we're born in the late afternoon in terms of the timing of the day, when the day began, Venus rose ahead of the sun, and it was conjunct Jupiter, the largest planet. So they're in this conjunction. That is a certain kind of energy, which generally means, don't tie me down. I want to be out there and sort of being free and open and so on. Well, in China on October 149, they have a Scorpio Venus. Okay, we brought in Scorpio. We're in the Scorpio time of the year, November, late October. And the China sun, as Wayne and I know, is in Libra, and they have a lot of Libra planets. They, in fact, have a Mercury-Neptune series triple conjunction in Libra. But the key thing is that on October 1 of 49, they are the opposite to the United States from this angle. The Venus is Hesperus. On the day that China, modern China, came into being, Venus wasn't rising in the east ahead of the sun at sunrise. On the day that China came into being and the sun was in Libra, Venus hadn't risen yet. It was behind the sun, and Venus would then be what we call Hesperus. It would have been a bright star, looked like a star, shining on the western horizon. And when you have Venus as what we call Hesperus setting in the west instead of it rising in the east, people are more conservative. They are not that willing to share who they are. They're not open and upfront. So I suddenly realized, and this isn't the only thing, but, I want to be succinct about it, but the big difference that we now see on the world stage with this pandemic, which is so obvious and which is causing concern for Wayne and myself. I mean, we're not spring chickens. And we are seeing people of all ages, including children, of course, and now there's a crisis of educational systems and hospitals. This was literally yesterday. They want the Biden administration to declare a national emergency because of this RSV or whatever, this respiratory illness that's worse than flu. Children can die from this. And people are going out. The thing I want to say, you were talking about, right, the stadium in Michigan, that big stadium. And last night, I wasn't watching football. I was doing other stuff. I caught the end of a game in South Carolina, in Columbia, where South Carolina defeated Tennessee, who had just lost to Georgia. They had been undefeated.
Correct.
And South Carolina is like a fairly mediocre team. At any rate, this is one of these rivalries. South Carolina hadn't beaten Tennessee for a while, and they won 63-38 at home. And I sent you this picture. Yep. It's a picture worth a bazillion words. Yep. Everyone is pouring out from the stadium. They're all like screaming and yelling. Now, meanwhile, like an hour or two later, this horrible event happens in Colorado Springs in a club, internal club, where people are just trying to have a good time. Meanwhile, Mars and Neptune are squaring. Mars and Gemini, Neptune and Virgo. Neptune and Pisces, and Neptune is opposing our own position. That hasn't happened for 164 years. It's part of the Pluto, part of the Neptune. And what Roger would say, and I've talked to you about this privately, as we get planets like Mars and Venus, which are either side of the Earth, this is a misunderstood thing, or shall we say a non-understood thing in astrology. When you go from the outer planets, the extremes and the longer cycles, and then you get a Mars or a Venus or a Moon, right, which is the closest satellite. For instance, every month we get Moon conjunct Pluto. We get Moon opposite Pluto. We get Moon square Pluto. We get Moon trine Pluto. When the Moon does anything with Pluto or with Neptune, the Moon is bringing the powers of these mysterious, profound outer forces. And it's sometimes like, again, at a full moon or a new moon, and we get a planet that's squaring the sun and moon or conjunct or opposite. We just had this on the total lunar eclipse, where the sun and Mercury were together opposite the moon and Uranus, day of the midterm election. It was very shocking. The Democrats held on to the Senate by a whisker. The Republicans, by a whisker, will run the House. Uranus is the planet of surprises and shocks. Very few people were even saying it's going to be a runaway for the Republicans. Nobody was predicting that the Democrats would win by a landslide, and that didn't happen. But how many people would have thought the Democrats would have actually held on to the Senate? That was not something that would be obvious. And what wasn't obvious either, it was predicted, again wrongly, that the Republicans would easily take the House, and that didn't happen. So again, Mercury and the Sun were together at that total lunar eclipse, full moon, on November 6th, 7th, just a little over, less than 2 weeks ago. And Uranus was with the moon on the other side. Okay, so what I just brought up is the personality energy and the soul forces moving through China based on its chart with the Venus and Scorpio setting behind the Sun in Libra tells an enormously different story than our country with Venus and Jupiter rising ahead of the Sun. And we see it in all these games and other things. The exercise clubs I know here in Eugene, every time I drive by, the parking lot is full. as soon as we got rid of the rules, like you can't do this and that, with social distancing, it's like everybody in America is like, it's over, it's gone. I don't care what anybody says, right? Now, that's not necessarily true for conservative people or for Wayne and myself, certainly for me. I'm an older person. I'm not going to be, going to football games or baseball games, even if, I had the tickets. And if I did, okay, I certainly wouldn't be massively running around, in the middle of the field with thousands of people without a mask. It just doesn't make any sense. And particularly if you have family, then you're going to go home and share and you don't know what's happening. It just seems like sort of mass insanity in general in this country. I understand where, people love sports and they want to have their lives back, but there you go. Moderation, all things.
Mass insanity. Mass insanity. I mean, I think about that, Mark, all the time because, it's like fish in water and birds in the air. How do you even know? This country has gone through a creeping mass insanity where we don't even trust the words in our language anymore, where there are alt realities, where people who have merit behind their lives have been questioned. Mm-hmm. And so here's my concern. I saw a Katharine Hepburn, and I can't remember the male actor. I think it was Something for All Seasons, where they're talking about the Queen of Aquitaine during the.
Oh yeah, right.
Okay, and so this guy, he's a counselor to the king, Sir Thomas More or Archbishop or somebody. I cannot.
That's
Canterbury. I can't remember. But what he says, and I'm going to paraphrase him, is, what are you going to do if you're against laws? What are you going to do when the last law is removed?
You're talking about the Lion in Winter movie. The Lion
in Winter. The Lion in Winter. So if people can Google that, and that's a famous exchange between him and her about why he took the positions he took and what he felt was happening in the society, and that any action basically on his part was going to cost him severely. I feel like those are the times that we're in where you can't even trust the air anymore or the water. And that's fact. That's literal. That there are places in the world where people can't trust the air and can't drink the water. And so, again, we are all part of a great whole, as Albert Einstein said, and we all live under a common sky. And in this common sky, the big picture that Mark has painted from the beginning is these are events that concern us all, because whether or not the war is happening in Ukraine or Poland or not, right, we have massive inflation in the whole world. We have supply chains interrupted all around the globe. We have countries taking stances, which happened during World War II. And when Japan takes a position in unity with Germany, and Germany in unity with Italy, we ended, and the United States with Australia and the Commonwealth and the UK, then you have a divided earth with all these things happening. I wanted to add something to what you were saying about the stadiums. Like who showed up? Well, Morgan Freeman, who I like his work, and I like his the Shawshank Redemption, and Who's Driving Miss Daisy. I like his works, and I like the spirit of the scripts that he takes and then he performs. And don't forget Glory. These are fantastic movies.
Yeah, but, and also deep impact when he's president of the United States.
Yeah, and then for him to be presiding over and in attendance with dignitaries that included Mohammed bin Salman, I would like to get into the thinking of these people of, even the devil. If the devil exists, you have to respect their power,
Right.
allow them to have their place and to have their territory and their station. Well,
Right.
yes and no, because, having lived in Germany for almost 6 years of my 70-year life, I can't understand how. Well, yes, I can. Yes, I can, because the German people are for order. That is definitely, that is not a stereotype. That the Germans like it neat, orderly, and clean, and that's what I loved as a child living in Germany. Even though I lived near war ruins and lots of buildings were blown up that hadn't been rebuilt by 1956, there was this quality of an ordered society that appealed to me.
Yeah.
But what is the price that you pay for order?
Right.
And I think that's the mistake that China is making now. And I must say this. While Pluto goes through Tehran and goes through the Persian Gulf, that's the midheaven line.
Yeah.
The Pluto descending line and the Mercury ascendant line run through Beijing. And people, the only tool that I know that reveals this as a reality is the one that Mark and I are using, the astrology. It is also true that the Pluto ascending line goes through Brasilia, Brazil, the capital of Brazil. It goes exactly through. It's not 20 miles or 30 miles or 100 miles up into the jungle. It's right through the city. And so when we're looking at this Pluto return and we're looking at who are the players, who are the key players to making decisions that are of such moment, we have to look at these other places. Pluto goes through the capital of Australia, Canberra.
Right.
And so we have to look, we have to stretch our lens and take in more and connect these pieces instead of being nationalistic, my team, my team's got to win. I play contact sports. I understand the psychology of that. I mean, I didn't hate those people that we played against, but boy, I had a few coaches that, unless you play with that kind of passion, really? Not really. Go ahead, Mark.
I got a gift for you in a moment. I got two main areas. It'll take me about 6 or 7 minutes, and I know you have something you just want to share with at closing. So I'm going to toss the ball back to you. So, folks, just so you know, we're in the last 10 minutes here, so, approximately. So here's the two things I just want to bring up, and there's a couple of things. One is there is a planet chaos. Unfortunately, astronomers are given the power to name planets. I think that's terrible. There should be a whole committee, and there really isn't. Chaos, as we know, the term goes out to ancient Greek. They probably would have had their K sound because it's spelled CHAOS. And for some reason, the last year or so, I did a whole podcast, The Outer Planets. It's one of the more popular ones I've done. And if you want to listen to it, folks, and you haven't, Mark Lehrer Astrology Radio, Astroscope at Great Bear Enterprises with an S.com. You go to Astroscope, and one of the podcasts was the new outer planets in your birth chart. And more people, I think, have listened to that podcast. They're like, whoa, wow. There's Sedna. There's Eris. There's this planet called Chaos. There's Quaoar, and I've done a lot of studying about that, discovered in early June of 2002. It has the letter Q. Now we have this whole issue with the QAnon movement, and I'll talk about that another time. Not that I'm going to blame the discovery of this particular planet Quaoar, but Quaoar turns out to be in conjunction with Pallas Athena and the Moon when America was born. All three planets in the same degree of the zodiac. So I will share more about that. But at any rate, one of the planets that's beyond Pluto is called Chaos, and it was discovered. I have the chart in front of me. I'm not going to get into it, but it was discovered 24 years ago yesterday, and it was weird because I have all these discovery charts, and before going to sleep, watching the events in Colorado and FIFA and everywhere else, Kim Jong-un with his daughter with a giant nuclear missile, and I'm thinking, whoa, talk about chaos. And then I realized, oh my God, Yesterday was November 19th. And chaos was discovered November 19th
There you go.
in Tucson, Arizona, 1998. So it's not only the discovery date, is 24 years later, which is sort of an approximate Jupiter cycle. At any rate, it turns out that when chaos was discovered, it's at 26.5 degrees of Taurus and exactly opposite the sun in Scorpio. So there's a sun chaos retrograde opposition when the planet was discovered, which, by the way, and another thing, I've shared this, is pretty much Joe Biden's birthday. Within one day, Joe Biden was born November 20th, 1942, just before what I call the nuclear axis, when Enrique Fermi and so on, the first nuclear chain reaction in Chicago, Illinois. And it turns out Joe Biden, born November 20th, 1942, now our president, for whatever mysterious reasons, he connects back to 1942, all these events of World War II, part of which Wayne and I have been sharing happened. There was an Operation Uranus in Ukraine and Russia that happened right at the same time that little Joe Biden came out, took his first breath. 12 days later, first nuclear chain reaction. Now, it turns out that Joe Biden, born November 20, 1942, is born exactly 17 years to the day from Robert Kennedy, November 20th, 1925, the brother of JFK. I'm about to do another podcast in the next 2 days about one of my most important articles, which was a cover story, which I have right in front of me, and I'll be reading for that, The Wound That Never Heals, America's Turning Point of the 20th Century. Cover story about the life and, unfortunately, the very horrific event that changed so much in my life and so many other people when President Kennedy was murdered 59 years ago, this Tuesday, 2 Saturn cycles later. Any rate, where I'm going with all this, okay, I'm not going to get into more about chaos, except for the fact that there has been so much chaos ever since I sort of have tuned into this, and particularly in the last 24 hours, and it's exactly the anniversary of this planet. And that planet is conjunct Neptune in the U.S. chart. We never knew that happened. And when the U.S. came into being, we didn't even know Neptune was there. We didn't know Uranus was there. We didn't know Pluto. We didn't know the 4 asteroids. We didn't know Chiron. And Wayne knows this very well because Brother Wayne often will share with me different times that, well, Mark, don't look at Pluto or Neptune. Let's just focus on the planets that we knew about, So as America grows and evolves, and by the way, just to throw another thing in, we got a Supreme Court that wants to go back to, witchcraft in the 1600s to prevent women from being able to have any kind of choice. And it's not as if they were ever had the vote in the beginning. That didn't happen until 1920 anyway. And now all of these issues are coming up through the Supreme Court. What I wanted to share was, let me share the gift, okay? And you can tell me whether or not you've ever done this, because I never did this before. There is what's called composite charting. And Wayne and I have shared about this in another way that I won't bring up right now. But there's 2 kinds of composite charting. A fellow named John Townley, a great astrologer, came up with this idea like 40 years or so ago. He particularly was very connected to where Wayne worked for a while, Matrix Software in Michigan, and where I also connected with Michael Erlewine and his fantastic work because he's designed so many of our computerized reports and so many technology. And he's also so strong in what we call heliocentric astrology, which so many people don't realize, and which is a big part of astrology beyond our geocentric charts. So John Townley created this whole phenomenon, just like Jim Lewis was one of the catalysts to create what we call astrocartography and astrolocality. And Michael Erlewine developed that. Now we have all the software for that. So there's 2 kinds of composite charting. What composite charting is all about is any 2 people, and you can do more than 2, but any 2 people, you find the midpoint. Remember I brought up earlier, right, about in Colorado's chart, Mercury and Mars, their midpoint is the sun in that chart. And as an example, we just had this horrific violence by shooting, and in a club where people are breathing the same air, Gemini, and the Mercury-Mars midpoint is the sun for Colorado. Okay. Now, in composite charting, this is not a real chart. You could take 2 people, okay? Now, here's the example. I did Brother Wayne's chart, and tell me if you've ever done this, and then I'll give you the answer, okay? So just tell me, Wayne, have you ever done your composite chart, the midpoint type chart for you in the United States?
Never.
Okay. So this is the gift. Before going to sleep, again, I don't know why this came to me, but it was like it was like a voice. Look at Wayne's chart and the United States, because we're about to do this thing, and look at your own chart with the United States. So all I have to do with my program is, as long as I'm in the program and the U.S. is in there, it's just a couple of buttons. So I've never looked at it before. And I do your chart, and I won't say the planetary positions or your exact birthday or anything. And I press a button. Your composite chart, the sun is conjunct Uranus, exactly with the United States. That's the permanent thing. It never changes. Wayne, with his book, The War Impulse Pattern, working with Vulcan Planet Earth, we have known each other as colleagues and then as friends and as brothers. We're doing Out of Bounds, which we had been doing non-recordings. We're bringing it to life. We're bringing it to sports. And here we are, the dawning of the fourth thing with all these events, Mars squaring Neptune, everything we brought to all of you today, and our concerns and our hopes. Jupiter's going to turn around, go direct 3 days. There's going to be a Sagittarius new moon. Mars in Gemini has some amazing qualities. Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, they all have positive qualities if we tap into it. And there I am staring your thing. So I'm going to share the symbol. I'm not going to tell you folks exactly what it is. I don't want to give away. Here's your symbol, though, based on Rudyard. Okay, I'm just going to read the symbol without saying the degrees. This is you and America, and this has to do with it just turns out, again, folks, this is important to realize. My connection with the U.S., I don't have the sun exactly conjunct anything in my chart with the U.S. I will give you my symbol, though. My symbol is, I will read in a moment. So, Wayne, the gift for you is we never did this kind of charting. Normally in composites, in fact, there's a program in my report area. All of you can order reports. They're in plain English. There's 17 reports in our astrology shop. One of them is called Synastry. And that is based on your composite chart with any person, you and your partner, you and your parent, you and your child, you and a friend. It's called Synastry. It's different than friends or lovers, which is what we call compatibility charting, which is a different kind of program. But this is all in the astrology report area. There's 17 different reports. So please order them, because it's a quick way within 2 days of getting what we call Skylog reports and timeline about your transits and progression. So one of them is called Synastry. So this is where you get composite. So you have this unique situation your whole life, from the very beginning, as soon as you were born, your first breath, Sun and Uranus between you and yourself are at the same degree. And the symbol is children skating over, you remember we brought up the cold and the snow? Children skating over frozen village pond, and Rudyard, this is from an astrological mandala by Dane Rudyard, who reinterpreted the Sabian symbols in this paperback from 1974. Children skating over frozen village pond, keynote, the use of inhibiting circumstances for the development of character and a transcendent approach to the environment. Now, Wayne at some point may share more about his work with nature. He mentioned earth harvest, gardening. So I'm just going to read a little bit more here because this is so profound. So this is what Rudyard says about the symbol. Again, this is your permanent, you just happen to have Sun Uranus at the same spot. Winter symbolizes darkness and the restrictions imposed upon living things by cold. Natural life is in a state of hibernation or interned activity. Yet the developing mind can learn to use restrictions and the disciplining power of cold, quote unquote, external responses to rise above the outer freeze and to grow in strength and skill. Man is nature rising above the cyclic oscillation of natural polarities. His way is often the via negativa. He learns rhythmic freedom, skating, by using the most binding situations, ice, to demonstrate his transcendent capacity for pleasure and self-mobilization. And then Rudyard says at the end, here again, the four-stage symbol presents us with a special technique. It is a mental technique inasmuch as it is through mind that man can transcend the entropy of the universal process of existence. We see here man's, and he puts this in all capitals, triumph over entropy. What do you think? Is that a gift or what?
That's pretty amazing. You know me, Moon and Mercury and Taurus, I'm going to take it in and take it apart.
Okay, and just there's two more things to share. Okay, so that's the gift, and I just wanted to share with everybody. Roger is so amazing, and I think what Wayne is doing is amazing with all his meticulous work based on technology, and to realize that any of you, this is not something to easily do, but even with the Synastry kind of report, you can do, hey, you in the United States, I can put those into a report, or you in China, Now, the U.S. chart that we work with is a very exact chart through rectification techniques based on several individuals, particularly varied lines. Here's mine, and I won't read all the symbolism, but my sun is at a particular degree. I don't have what you have, okay? My sun is not with, Uranus, okay? It's by itself in the composite. But the symbol is a symbolical battle between swords and torches. Keynote, refusing to depend upon the past. The seeker turns warrior, fighting anew the eternal, quote, great war, unquote. And at any rate, he goes into the Bhagavad Gita, the Gautama, the Buddha, which is interesting because the philosophies that I'm closest to, having been born Jewish and studied Christianity and Islam and so on, are Buddhism and Taoism. So there's my connection, that symbol for the sun for me. And here's the other thing. Uranus is exactly on that symbol for me, exact, right now. So, Brother Wayne, you have sun with Uranus permanently since the first breath of you in the country, and my sun is being hit by transiting Uranus as I'm sharing this with you, and the whole thing just came up this morning.
And again, Mark, just to be clear, this is my chart and the U.S. chart, the composite chart, and then
Exactly.
this your chart and the U.S., the composite chart, correct?
Right. Yes, and you just happen to have the sun. And here's why. Here's the amazing thing, without giving away all the details in your chart, because I don't like to do that. You have the sun and Uranus so many degrees apart, basically, and they're in a configuration. I looked it up earlier, like 35 degrees of distance between your sun and Uranus. And the same distance happened in the United States chart. See, this is a kind of forte of mine, but I don't always look at it until this morning. So I never did it for myself, for Wayne, or any other human being. It was just like, came to me, which is often something is like, why? It's because to elucidate this moment of time of this fourth episode. And why? Because Mars is going, and here's the other part of this. Mars was on our Uranus. Mars is currently retrograde, as we've been sharing in the last podcast and this one, in Gemini. Well, on September 5th, Mars hit our Uranus, okay? And again, think of this is the Jupiterian 83-year cycle, equivalent 2022, hoping that we don't get into another world war, fingers crossed. But 83 years ago was when the Germans invaded Poland, as we said before. Now we have this issue with NATO and the missiles. On September 5th, and a couple of days before, but on September 5th, Mars exactly hit the United States Uranus. Then it went retrograde the day before Halloween. On New Year's, when we were all celebrating the New Year, I said earlier, Venus and Pluto are going to be conjunct as we're all hoping and praying that 2023 will be positive. Now, there are positive things about the New Year. Sun in Capricorn, Libra is rising almost everywhere around the planet, which is peace and goodwill. I've written about this before. You can do a chart for New Year's. Rudyard did New Year's charts. You can even do the chart of a millennium. You can do the chart there are charts for the 20th century and the 21st century. You can actually look at that. January 1, 2001, using the one digit rather than the zero, is the 100-year cycle of the 21st century. Just like the 20th century began January 1, 1901, rather than 1900. There are lots of unusual cycles that people could use. You could do the cycle of midnight, Sunday, in your locality, which is the start of the week from a civil standpoint, and do a week chart. You could start the day at sunrise where you are if you wanted to do like the daytime energy and see what your day could unfold in the town based on sky cycles. Because look, there's also my astrology cosmic calendar I've done for 41 years to tout that again, which is an app for free 1 day at a time or pennies a day by subscription, astrology cosmic calendar with a K. So that's available. But yeah, no, this is just to clarify. All of us have a composite relationship, which is how we merge with the country we're in. As long, some countries we don't know, like the timing, or it's speculative. That's why most of these things, like this program called Synastry, generally most people will order like loved ones, or you and a child, or you and a friend. As long as the birth times are reasonably accurate, then the results are there. Wayne has an exact birth time, and we're using a chart that we've used for decades with the U.S. And I just couldn't believe I'm looking at when your thing pops up, it's like, you got to be kidding me. How is this even possible? Sun conjunct Uranus for you in the country, but it makes total sense.
It makes total sense.
So I have one other thing, and then I know you have a closing. So the other thing I just want to bring up about future shock, okay? This is also just literally like a half an hour before we started, just so I get this out there. We have a lot of things that are about to happen. We have the new moon this Wednesday. As I said, Mars is rising for the U.S. It's on these key angles, as Wayne was saying. You look at Moscow, you look at Brasilia, also Japan, other places where Mars is on an angle. So it's not just the U.S. It's just that in our chart, Mars is rising. And so all of the stuff that we bring up, particularly about Mars and its power for good or for ill, is going to be highlighted at this new moon and over the next couple of weeks. So, whether it's sports, military things, all these different stories, we're hoping that the Mars energy is passion used for good purposes, sports, athletics, leadership, all these other qualities that Mars represents, exercising. There's so many wonderful qualities with Mars, and even on a level of love and relationship within the right expression. I said before, I often think of the difference between someone who's assertive and somebody who's aggressive. So understanding these different terms. So here's one other thing to fast forward to the springtime for one moment, just to round things up. And please, Wayne, give me some comments aside from your closing when I say this. This will only take me a minute to say. We will eventually focus on this time period. This is the spring equinox coming up around March 21. This is what's going to happen in March. We're going to have Pluto go into Aquarius for the first time in 247 years on March the 23rd. Pluto will enter Aquarius. That's the official first date. It will go back into Capricorn a couple of times. We're going to have like a year and a half of Pluto into early Aquarius, back into Capricorn, and so on. But the first moment in 240 plus years of Pluto being in Aquarius is March 23rd. That's 2 days after the equinox. On the equinox, or 3 days, March 20th is the equinox, okay? Sun going into Aries. On the day that happens, or actually the next morning after the sun goes into Aries, which is, by the way, called now International Astrology Day, just so everybody knows. So that's come up recently. I don't know who originated that, but maybe because the zodiac begins with Aries, springtime, and so on, astrologers decided, hey, that's International Astrology Day. So March 20th, March 21 is the new moon at zero plus Aries. But on the 20th, the day before, the sun actually goes into Aries, and Jupiter and Saturn, the two largest planets, will make a 45-degree arc. So we've got Jupiter and Saturn, who just entered Aquarius at the winter solstice in 2020. They entered Aquarius at 0 plus. They're going to make a 45-degree relationship as we hit the spring equinox. Pluto will enter Aquarius and hit that same spot, okay, igniting the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which is a 20-year cycle that started 2 years ago. So we're in a Jupiter-Saturn Aquarius dispensation of air signs. The air sign Jupiter-Saturn phenomenon of every 20 years is going to go on for like 180 years. But we just had that start 2 years ago at 0 of Aquarius. Pluto hits that point March 23rd. Jupiter and Saturn make this frictional pattern as we hit the beginning of springtime, the zodiacal beginning of the year at the spring equinox. And I'm not done. Mars, which is in Gemini all of these months, will finally leave Gemini to enter Cancer on March 25th. 2 days after Pluto goes into Aquarius. And because Mars will go into Cancer, it will be in square pattern to the equinox itself, which is at 0 of Aries. And one more thing, the largest asteroid Ceres, which is the key planet in the asteroid belt where a planet ought to be or may have been a long time ago, Ceres will be at 0 of Libra. And remember good old Chaos that I brought up? Well, Chaos is currently right around 0 of Cancer. So that's part of the reason why Chaos, with its 310-year cycle, it's on the solstice point. It's very rare for anything to be at a solstice or equinox point, the 4 key sort of turning points of the zodiac, particularly for a planet that has a 310-year cycle. Bottom line is part of this is going to happen this winter solstice, but the big thing is when we have the spring equinox, Jupiter and Saturn 45 degrees apart. 3 days later, Pluto goes into Aquarius. Mars leaves Gemini on the 25th of March to go into Cancer, which is the summer solstice point. And Ceres is at 0 Libra, opposite the sun and moon, at a new moon taking place at the equinox. By the way, Saturn goes into Pisces on March 7th and changes from where it has been in Aquarius the last couple of years. So we've got an extraordinary number of things that are going to happen in the springtime of next year. And one other final comment about that, just like happened in World War II, and I'm not thinking negatively here, when the war started in 1939, all of these terrible things back to Poland happened with Poland. And then there was what was called like this phony war, this thing in Paris. People were just sort of like having their expresses and so on. They were hoping nothing would happen. Then boom, the springtime, the change out of the winter, Hitler winds up invading Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and suddenly marches into Paris, was it June 10th, whatever, and reverses everything from the end of World War I, all happening in the spring when the weather changed. So we brought up snowstorms. We're bringing up all kinds of other issues having to do with astrometeorology, sports, COVID, all these extremes around the planet, with sports and with people gathering or not gathering and all of our concerns. So I just wanted to bring up, before you know it, we're going to go through this winter. Hopefully children will not get sick from what's going on with these flu bugs and everything else. But for people who are older, we're looking at how can we be careful and conservative, not just for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, and so on. So I just want to bring up, we're going to have a really, really powerful spring. I hope that we'll share more about it in the future, but at least there's a little bit tip of the iceberg, what's ahead. So please share whatever you want about what I brought up and your closing ideas.
Well, as you know, Mark, I'm a gardener. And on those dates, at the end of the week, on a Friday, on the 24th, we'll have Moon in Taurus. We'll have Venus in Taurus. We'll have Uranus in Taurus. And I just can't wait until spring. Right. I can't wait to see yet another spring. We're in our 70s, and we don't have too many more of them to come. And spring is one of my favorite times of the year. And, of course, I love my garden in spring. Mm-hmm. So from a personal note, as far as processing all of those 1,000 facts that you just laid out for me, I'm going to have to unpack it.
Yeah.
I, too, like to be an optimist. And the moon in Taurus is, well, I'll just leave it at that. I, too, like to be an optimist about where things are headed. As soon as Pluto goes into Aquarius, that's my moon sign. And I have been reflecting on that for quite some time now. Quite some time. Because...
by the way, what Wayne is referring to is what I'm bringing up. You're talking about March 24th, like a Friday. The moon is in Taurus right after this time period when all these big things are happening, and Venus will be in Taurus and Uranus. right? That's what you're talking
Yeah.
about when you talk about your spring garden. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so, I always look forward to spring, and I look forward to spring in normal ways, not as astrological ways. And I see spring as the return of life to the earth, literally.
Right.
And everything feels uplifting for me. Everything. The sun is brighter, the air is warmer, the ground is growing, it's fresh, the birds are singing. And so how can you help but not be optimistic in the northern hemisphere with the return of spring? As far as the astrology is concerned, Mark and I, we look at dark things for a reason. It's because somebody needs to. If the king has no clothes, you have to say the king has no clothes. You have to have eyes open, and you have to be conscious. And so if this isn't a tool that wakes you up, I don't know what is. So, Mark, I will study what you have pointed out. And I look forward to the composite. Are you going to send it to me? Or are you going to send me what you were looking for?
Yeah, because I will send it to you, and I'm studying my own. And one other little thing before you give your close, okay? I did my composite with China, and this is a kind of personal thing. And we'll come back, folks, to share more. Once Wayne studies his and I look at mine more, again, if you have a connection with a particular country, and see, mine happened at Michigan State when I was in school. My main professor was Dr. Kwan-Wei So for Chinese history. Now, I didn't know that I'd get into astrology, but I was writing for the Michigan State newspaper, and this was during the Nixon era. I was writing all about what was happening with the Vietnam War, places like Cambodia, Vietnam, China emerging, as a superpower and things like that. Time period of Mao. He had died in 1976. I was already out of college. But my professor, I learned later, Wayne, just so you know, I think I told you this a while back, in the area of Chinese history, I think it's called Asian history at Michigan State, he passed away. He was a great guy, right? I got to be really close to him, coming from New York to learn my professors. He invited me over to his home. I remember him and his wife one time with tea and all of this stuff, and he and I would sometimes have lunch together, and I learned so much about Chinese history from him. And it turns out that my chart, with I have something like you have with America, Sun with Uranus. What I have with China is Sun conjunct Venus, which I wrote the book Mysteries of Venus. This explains why before I ever got into astrology, because I was, a couple of years before that, I'm learning from this great professor. And the final part of this thing, I think of it every day in my meditation. I think of a lot of different people, soulfulness, family, loved ones, the world, creating goodwill. I mean, my own personal meditation, I'm just saying, everybody's got affirmations, prayers, meditations, whatever any of us do based on our philosophies, our religions, and so on. So what I learned like 2 or 3 years ago, I decided to look up my two main professors. One was in sociology, and I thought, well, he was a young guy, and he's still alive, the sociology professor, Sal Restivo, and he's like in his 80s. But Dr. Kwan-Wei So was already like 60 years old. This is like, 50 years ago? Not going to be 110 probably. So he died, and they name every year there is a student who excels, and they're given, gives me chills, the Dr. Kwan-Wei So Award. I didn't know that. There were maybe other professors, but he was such a standout, and I remembered him, and now I learned that in astrology, I have a Sun-Venus conjunction with the chart of China, which comes out of Mao. Comes out of October 1, 1949, the chart that everyone uses now for Red China, Communist China. So we've brought now a new concept based on you and me. And I was doing this at 4 or 5 in the morning. I've done this for 50 years in astrology. I never did this.
Yeah. Well, Mark,
it's unbelievable.
Mark, just a reminder to pin something else on the wall with respect to what you just said. Richard Wilhelm went to China, lived in China, translated their great works, came back with The Secret of the Golden Lotus, made a connection with Carl Jung, and they both understood that they both were talking about what Carl Jung named synchronicity. So the whole idea that you would be doing the work that you're doing now and that it would be connected to China, total sense. And one thing that I know as a person using relocation tools is when I relocate my horoscope to Beijing, China, the midheaven is 27 degrees Capricorn.
The U.S. Pluto.
And the transiting Pluto.
And let me, right now, where my phone is, we're doing this, folks, by the technology of iPhone technology or mobile phone. There are other techniques of doing this, but this is the best way that we're doing this. My phone is sitting on top of the Rudyard book. So get this, and I hadn't thought about this. Rudyard was the one who reinterpreted, Dr. Mark Edmund Jones bringing the Sabian symbols in 1924 with his psychic Elsie Wheeler to get the 360 degrees. It was like an all-day thing, an amazing story. There's a whole book called The Sabian Symbols by Dr. Mark Edmund Jones, 1924. So just like you're talking about Richard Wilhelm and Carl Jung, as you know and I do, studied the charts of married people. What did I just say? That there's synastry report. Often married people, or father and a daughter, father and a son, mother and a daughter, mother and a son, grandparent, whatever it is, friend, associate. We have this thing called, it's called simpaticos. I said synastry. Simpaticos is the name of the report in the astrology report section. Different than friends and lovers. But guess what? One more thing, and then please give your closing statement an idea. On Rudyard's book, An Astrological Mandala, first of all, mandala comes out of the East. Then the subtitle is The Cycle of Transformations. Transformations is definitely Pluto, and it's 360 symbolic phases. But here's the other amazing thing, because I don't think even you and I think about it all that often. He calls it a reinterpretation of the Sabian symbols, presenting them as a contemporary American I Ching, the I Ching, out of the East. And then on the cover of this book is a six-pointed star coming out of these clouds that show this sort of heaven and earth connection, and the whole idea of the I Ching as this other system of hexagrams and all the stuff coming out of China. And it's kind of like right there again, the underlying thing that we just shared in Out of Bounds, as we do all the time and we've done privately. So over and over again. And by the way, the Sun and Jupiter today are making one of only two trines, the two largest planets. I said this to you the other day. Oddly enough, Jupiter is always and only can be retrograde. You cannot have this flowing, harmonious, wonderful connection of the Sun and Jupiter in your chart, anybody's chart, unless Jupiter's retrograde. So right before Jupiter ever goes retrograde or goes direct, you get a Sun-Jupiter trine. We're about to have Jupiter go direct, okay? And that'll be in 3 days. So a couple days before Jupiter goes direct, the Sun trines Jupiter when it's retrograde. And a few days before Jupiter actually, at any rate, this is a phenomenon that's part of the solar system. So you cannot have Sun trine Jupiter and Jupiter's moving direct. It's an impossibility, and it's based on the structure of the whole system, the solar system, as above, so below. So I've shared my final little story here today in this long session. So I know you have something to close with. Please do so.
Yes, it's something that I've done. It's lived experience, and that is, I wish for all of you that you find your place and seize the time and live your life as art.
Well, thank you so much. And I just want to wish everybody many blessings, lots of love and inspiration. And again, thinking of hope, goodwill is love in action. And all your needs will be met. on the positive level is part of like what came out of, for me, my experience for several years at the Findhorn community. And goodwill is love in action is a big part of working at Lucis Trust and their Beacon magazine and studying these books by the Tibetan master DK, who's channeled through Alice Bailey. So thanks very much for everybody listening, and we'll look forward to the next time with episode 5. Okay, thank you so much. Love and blessings. Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you, Mark.